Good evening. Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call for tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening and welcome to the annual budget meeting of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting. My name is Tom Byrne, RTM moderator. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our April 10th meeting, the reading of the minutes will be omitted. I do have 3 changes to those minutes, the first one being on page 7. In the third paragraph, where it says in the first sentence, the word sentence should be deleted and replaced by line of the resolved clause. So that paragraph should begin in the first line of the resolved clause. And at the end of that line that we were just talking about, it says, and in the second sentence, delete the word sentence there and insert line in its place. So it would read, and in the second line, delete the words, etc. Then on page 15, referring to the motion made by Doug Wells on behalf of the Legislative and Rules Committee, there were some technical changes. The first line, it says in section 145A, it now reads the minutes in the 4th, 6th, and 8th lines. That should be 4th, 7th, and 9th lines. So we'll change 6th to 7th and 8th to 9th. And on the next page, this is page 16, regarding Mr. Small's motion to amend item number 11, it says by adding some wording. That should be by adding the following wording. So delete the word some and replace it with the following. Are there any other corrections or amendments to the minutes of our April 10th meeting? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as amended stand adopted upon unanimous consent. Before we get to the call for tonight, is Mr. Norton here? Art Norton, who headed up the effort to rebuild Western Greenwich Civic Center and a member of the BET.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's actually the Bentime Western Greenwich Civic Center. Seeing that they gave us $2.5 million, I think we should be recognizing them. Approximately 11 months ago, we began construction. We're slightly ahead of schedule. The building, I think, is looking very nice. The scaffolding will come down from much of the rest of the building sometime in the next few weeks when they complete the power washing. And hopefully we'll be able to open either in the end in Q4 or early in 2007. But what I wanted to do was to let town meeting know where we're progressing with this. And because of all the activity that we've had, especially with Charlton Daycare, and we've begun the RFP process for that, and hopefully we'll conclude and resolve that process in the next 60 days. The foundation has decided to hold another pancake breakfast, and that will be on the 10th of June, which is 4 weeks from this Saturday, or the Saturday before the next RTM meeting. And I wanted to invite all members of the representative town meeting and their guests to join us at our next pancake breakfast, which will probably be our last, because the building should be open by this time next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who needed to be recognized before we get to the call tonight? Okay. That brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. Item number 1. Mr. Wells, would you do us the favor of offering that resolution? Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, item 1, resolved that the time to speak at the May RTM be limited to 3 minutes per speaker for each motion, except that the proponent and the principal opponent for the motion, the latter to be determined by the moderator, shall be entitled to speak for 10 minutes each, and the committee reports be limited to 10 minutes each.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 1 has been moved and seconded. Mr. Wells?
This resolution to limit debate was passed by our committee 10-0-0 with districts 3 and 9 absent.
Thank you. Because this is a limit on debate that will be in effect for the entire meeting, it is debatable. Discussion on item 1? I will call for a voice vote. If you are in favor of limiting all speakers to 3 minutes per motion per item, with the exception of the proponents and principal opponents being given up to 10 minutes, and also limiting committee reports to 10 minutes each, you should vote in favor of this motion to limit debate. All those in favor of the motion to limit debate, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Item number 2 now comes before us. Mr. Wells?
Mr. Moderator, item 2, resolved that at the meeting of the RTM on Monday, May 8, 2006, if the business of the meeting has not been concluded by 12 midnight, the meeting shall adjourn at that time to meet again on Tuesday, May 9, 2006, at 8 p.m. at Central Middle School.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 2 has been moved and seconded. Mr. Wells, with the report of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Our vote on this item was 10-0-0 with districts 3 and 9 absent.
Thank you. Discussion on item 2. I will call for a voice vote. All those in favor of the resolution on item 2, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. So, if we do not conclude by midnight tonight, we will adjourn to tomorrow night. That now brings us to item number 3, which is the annual budget for the town of Greenwich. Peter Tessie, Chair of the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen of the RTM and guests. On behalf of the Board of Estimate and Taxation and pursuant to Section 23 of the Greenwich Town Charter, I submit for your consideration and action the proposed appropriations recommended by the Board of Estimate and Taxation for the expenses and conduct of the affairs of the Town of Greenwich, Connecticut for the fiscal year 2006-7, July 1, 2006 to June 30, 2007, inclusive as follows. $361,524 for the General Fund and Capital Projects Fund, $5,916,058 for the Sewer Maintenance Fund, $5,161,000 for the Sewer Improvement Fund, $3,674,928 for the Parking Fund of the town, $345,725 for the Parking Fund state portion, $4,146,785 for the Public School Lunch Program Revolving Fund, $2,177,736 for the Griffith E. Harris Golf Course Revolving Fund, and $5,500,000 for the other post-employment benefits funds. I so move.
Thank you.
Tonight you will act on the BET's request to approve a town budget which consists of a series of appropriations contained within the 8 previously referenced funds, the General and Capital Projects Fund being the most significant. The March 1st BET Budget Committee transmittal memorandum covers in detail the contents of the proposed 2006-7 budget. The focus of my written message to you is about the capital budget and the means of financing for it. I hope these communications are helpful to you in understanding this budget. By now, most if not all of you have been exposed to the proposed budget through the various public meetings held by the BET on the budget and through the various RTM standing committees and district meetings. Members of the BET attended your committee and district meetings last week to listen to your deliberations and address concerns about this budget. We took note of your comments and suggestions for improvements to the process and are pleased that all of the standing committees recommended approval of this budget, minus a $50,000 reduction by town services for the fire department's water budget. Hopefully that appeases all of you who think we're a little bloated. We shed some water weight with the recommendation from Town Services. The budget process begins once the BET establishes budgetary guidelines for town departments and the Board of Education to follow in preparing their budget submissions. The BET Budget Committee recommends these guidelines to the full BET, and they are voted upon in September. For the last several years, the BET budget guidelines have resulted in increases to the mill rate of 3.5% or less. As a result of a charter amendment adopted by the voters in 2003, the first selectman is a central figure in the development of town department budgets and the capital budget. There are many opportunities for citizen input into the capital budget, as a public hearing was held in September and January with the Capital Improvements Projects Committee present, and another presentation was made to the BET Budget Committee. Public participation in the development of the 10-year capital plan is through various neighborhood associations and organized community groups that have expressed their thoughts to the first selectman. The first selectman receives the various town department budgets by December 1st, reviews them, and makes necessary adjustments where necessary. The Board of Education submits its budget by December 31st, and the Board of Estimate and Taxation Budget Committee receives the first selectman's and Board of Education's budget on February 1st. The Budget Committee first reviews the budget with the first selectman, town departments, and the Board of Education, and then holds another public hearing before making their final recommendations to the full BET. The full BET holds another public hearing on the budget prior to making their decision and passing on a proposed budget to you, the RTM. The condition of our town's capital infrastructure, building roads and sewers, have been a highly publicized subject for the past decade. The earliest sign of decay was the failing sewer lines of the mid to late 1990s that resulted in the discharge of raw sewage onto the streets of Old Greenwich and Byram. The failure of these sewer lines resulted in the Federal Environmental Protection Agency and the state DEP's imposition of a consent decree that mandates the repair of our sewer lines. More recently, conditions at the Hamilton Avenue and Glenville Elementary Schools have exposed the deferred maintenance of prior years. Therefore, a 10-year capital improvement plan was developed to address both the replacement and repair of our capital assets and the earmarking of long-term maintenance funds. This planning will ensure that we do not leave future generations with the burdens we shoulder today. Contained within the message sent to you is an explanation of capital, page number 2 in your book, of the capital budget 2006-07 financing. It is important you understand these numbers as they relate to this year's request and how they impact future years. By now you have read and discussed these at the committee and district levels, therefore I will not do so again. For many decades, the town of Greenwich has used a financing mechanism provided for under Connecticut general statutes to finance capital projects. We refer to it as modified pay-as-you-go, and it allows us to fund our capital projects up to 5 years. When the RTM approves the budget, you are appropriating the full amount of the proposed project, but for selected projects, the town is spreading the payment over 5 years. The BET has proposed that we raise an additional $2.5 million through short-term borrowing, which exactly mirrors our modified pay-as-you-go plan. In fiscal year 2006-07, the town would issue bonds with a maturity not to exceed 5 years. 1/5 of the bonds would be paid off at the end of year 1, 1/5 after year 2, until the last fifth is paid off at the end of the 5th year. This borrowing does not commit the town to borrow in subsequent years, and in subsequent years we will determine which projects the town wants to undertake, the size of contributions into and out of the Capital Reserve Fund, and decide if we need to borrow and in what amount. Last year at this time, we projected borrowing $10 million, but this amount was reduced by 75% to $2.5 million after the various planning sessions took place. During the 1990s, Greenwich borrowed internally to help offset costs for school additions necessitated by rapidly rising enrollments. At that time, use of the parking fund and the internal service/risk fund were part of the financing program. Today, the internal service and risk fund is obsolete because it was converted to the other post-employment benefits fund that covers the town's post-employment benefit liabilities. Connecticut general statutes prohibits municipalities from borrowing from the OPEB fund. The balance in the parking fund continues to be drawn upon for operating expenses for traffic engineering and for the police directing traffic on Greenwich Avenue. These charges to the parking fund are the result of an RTM directive in the late 1990s to pay for these services from this fund. The capital plan is significant because it contains a financing system demonstrating how the projects will be funded using a combination of pay-as-you-go and short-term borrowing. It should be recognized that the proposed capital plan and financing are tied together. If the proposed financing plan is rejected, some capital projects may be deferred or eliminated in this year or future years. Raising taxes beyond the BET guideline is an unlikely option, as it has provided stability to taxpayers, particularly those on fixed incomes. Simply stated, this budget provides for essential town services and funds necessary capital projects while keeping the increase in the rate of taxation to 3.5% in fiscal year '07. So at this time, I want to express appreciation and thanks to the people who played such an integral part of developing the budget. We begin with our first selectman, Jim Lash, and his Capital Improvement Projects Committee for submitting a thoughtful 10-year plan that addresses our long-identified infrastructure needs of the town. The Board of Education and town departments for their cooperation in response to the various requests for information, and the Budget Committee led by Stephen Walco, assisted by Ed Krummick, Michael Mason, and Larry Simon, for the time and care spent meeting with and reviewing this budget and articulating through its message the details contained within. In addition, thanks to our professional staff, Town Administrator Ed Gomo, Controller Peter Minarski, and Budget Director Roland Geiger, whose effort made the development of this budget possible. And finally, to members of the BET who attended so many of the deliberations, they're here to my right this evening, and to you members of the RTM who took part in the process from inception. Thank you for participating in the process and offering input and suggestions for making it better. Thank you, and good luck with your deliberations.
Thank you. Mr. Tessie has moved the budget. Is there a second? The budget resolution, item 3 on our call, has been moved and seconded. I will talk about the procedure we will follow tonight after we get our committee reports, so that it is fresh in our mind when we begin going through the budget. But very briefly, we will be working with the budget resolution that appears in the budget book that was sent in the mail to you. The resolution itself consists of 9 pages, labeled Resolutions 1 through 9. And that resolution incorporates the line items that appear by major object code, which we will go through one by one, which appear in the RTM section of the budget book, and that's pages labeled RTM 1 through RTM 20. But I'll talk a little more about that after our committee reports. So, may we have the reports of our committees? And I invite the committee chairs to come down. And if you want to change the order, go right ahead, but who's going to go first for us? And I'll just remind our committee chairs that there is a 10-minute, up to a 10-minute limit on the report. Mr. Huffman? Randall Huffman, Chair of our Budget Overview Committee.
Good evening. Well, the night that I warned about a month or two ago is here. There's been a lot of hard work on the part of a lot of people. A long effort going over months. Peter Tessie indicated a little bit of it, but unless you're involved in a lot of this process, you don't realize the hours put in by the town employees, by members of the BET, by members of some of these RTM committees and others in reviewing all the aspects of developing the budget. And it is to be noted that the BET did stay within the tax guidelines that they had established for themselves at the beginning of the process. At the same time, as noted before, the general fund expenditures will be increasing 10.91, or almost 11%, from last year's record level. A certain amount of that does, as has been noted, reflect increases in the capital budget. But even taking out the capital budget, there is still a 7 3/4 increase in operating fund expenditures. In addition to that, there are amounts being spent from the parking fund and other funds that were mentioned by Mr. Tessie that go to pay what most people view as operating expenses of the town. So in fact, we're actually looking at an increase in spending that even exceeds the numbers that we talked about. The BOC met on April 27th to consider the budget. We were particularly concerned at that point in the process with the language of the resolutions and with two particular issues that we put before ourselves. The first of those is the issue that has been discussed briefly before, and that is that this budget contains an authorization for a general obligation borrowing of $2.5 million for a 5-year bond to be issued as a general obligation of the town payable from taxes raised by the town taxpayers. In our deliberations, we discussed the appropriateness and the necessity of that provision in the budget. In our discussion, a motion was put forward that the BOC recommend the deletion of the borrowing of $2.5 million provision from the resolutions. Reasons given by those who advocated that resolution were that it was felt that the town should not issue external debt, that those exceptions that we've made in the past, either for self-liquidating sewer debt or for the extraordinary circumstance of the Pomerantz purchase or the borrowing from ourselves, were not an appropriate guidance or precedent for a tax-based general borrowing for our capital projects. It is not something we have done previously in this town for many years. Furthermore, it was noted that under the numbers that we've been shown, even if all the monies that were spent for capital projects actually are expended, the town will still have a balance in capital funds available at the end of the year, less than they would like, and the justification given for the borrowing is to keep that reserve amount at a higher level. But in fact, the borrowing is not necessary to pay for capital projects as contemplated in this year. But this is really the first step in a borrowing program which has been recommended and which contemplates the issuance over the next several years of in excess of $100 million in tax-based borrowings. As I started to say at one previous time, debt is not really a 4-letter word. We all use debt at times, or most of us do, to pay for major expenditures, to pay for long-term expenditures. But is it appropriate, if you've stuffed $1 million under the mattress, to go out and buy your new stereo system with a credit card? That's really the issue that we're talking about. Following our discussion in the BOC, the motion to delete the borrowing, however, was defeated by a vote of 3 to 6, with 3 districts absent. The 6 who voted against the resolution felt that since the amount was small and the capital needs were great, that it was appropriate to accede to the recommendations of the BET and the town administration. I think there are a couple of things in the budget, though, that we ought to look at briefly. I'm not sure how many of you have gone through line by line each of the items, even in the summary of expenditures, but one that I think it's worth drawing attention to tonight is that we have budgeted for this year nearly $3.2 million to pay workers' compensation claims. Workers' compensation claims up, I think, over 8% even from the budgeted amount from last year. Now, workers' compensation claims are a requirement of the town under state law. Appropriate claims certainly should be paid, but study after study has shown in many states that many of the workers' compensation claims result from avoidable carelessness, poor safety practices, and cases of abuse and malingering. I would call upon the town for the future to take a very serious look at the need to budget $3.2 million for workers' compensation claims, an amount which, if passed in this budget tonight, will not come back before the RTM in this budget year for any approval or review. And it does not go to the Claims Committee. These amounts are simply paid out in the process of administering the workers' compensation program. If we were able to eliminate, for example, say 2/3 of that budgeted amount in a year, we would have almost enough to cover the amount that is felt to be necessary to be borrowed in this year.
1 minute.
Okay. In summary, following its discussion, with some concerns and some expressions of reluctance, the BOC voted to approve the budget you have before you, 9-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brady, Chair of our Education Committee.
Good evening, fellow members, Mr. Moderator, guests. The Education Committee met on Monday evening, May 1, to consider the 2007 budget items, fiscal 2007 budget items assigned to it. The committee also met with the Board of Education, libraries, and Bruce Museum in February, March, and April to discuss their budgets in more detail. The action taken last Monday are summarized below. Excuse me. Account 410, which is a health department account, it's the dental health program for the schools. Total in the account is $221,671. About 78% of this, $173,000, relates to the dental health program in the pre-elementary and middle schools. Conduct teeth examinations, dental exams, referring those needing work to dentists in town. Last year they examined about 5,300 children. It also includes voluntary fluoride treatments. We voted 10-01 to recommend this item. District 4 was not present for the discussion. District 2 is unrepresented. District 2 is unrepresented for all of the items discussed. The Board of Education accounts, the 6 XX series, $113,865,757. We voted 11-0-0 in favor of that. The Board of Ed operating budget increased about 3.9% or $4.3 million from last year's budget. There is a 25-person decrease in certified staff and 6-person decrease in non-certified staff, which relates to the 246 budget-to-budget student headcount decrease from last year to the budget year. Student-teacher ratio remains unchanged. The result is lower growth in payroll expenses at 2.3% and the total budget at 3.9%. Programmatic improvements are focused on the elementary school math program, foreign languages, and middle school writing programs. The maintenance expenditures on the less than $25,000 items, small items, increased nearly $300,000, and there is a new $200,000 item to provide for litigation settlements in the operating budget. The Board of Education's capital budget is $12,340,000. That excludes the Hamilton Avenue and Glenville items, which are operated by separate building committees. The Board of Ed believes this fully funds its current needs. The work required is based upon facility audit, which identified maintenance deficiencies and needed fixes. However, the standards of the buildings and properties are still evolving. For example, there's a continuing discussion as to whether the environmental standard requires that all classrooms be air-conditioned. The expenditures are across all buildings and generally are described by the caption they're under. However, the playground category turns out also includes other exterior work such as lighting, exterior lighting work at New Lebanon and Julian Curtis. The 10-year budget includes all of the out-year projects the Board of Education believes it needs, except the new 25,000 square foot headquarters building. This was originally in the budget for $13 million, but was erroneously reduced to $2 million, which is included in account 345, 956, and fiscal 09. We were told this would be inserted in next year's CIP. The Hamilton Avenue Building Committee has asked for and budgeted to receive $1.8 million to complete the installation of furniture and fixtures at the new Hamilton Avenue School. The building is scheduled for occupancy in September '07. The Glenville School Building Committee is budgeted to receive $1.4 million for architectural engineering design work. The GSBC has hired Turner Construction as project manager and is interviewing architects and engineers to do the design work. $860 was previously appropriated and $19 million is projected for appropriation in fiscal '08. $4,146,785 is appropriated to account 670, which is the school lunch revolving fund. It is financed primarily by cafeteria receipts and federal grants. This is the spending side, so they can actually buy the food, although it is a revolving fund. The ninth whereas on resolution page 5 authorizes acceptance of a $1.2 million gift for Greenwich High School playing fields from the Greenwich Sports Foundation. Mr. Crowell pointed out to us that half of this has already been received and that the item should be reduced to $600,000. We adopted a resolution to amend this item to $600,000, 1100, and adopted the amended resolution. I request to be recognized at the appropriate time to submit such resolution amendment. The last resolution on resolution page 6 authorizes acceptance and appropriation of various education grants. That too was approved. All of the education items were approved 1100. Account 701, the main library, $6,533,629. This was approved recommended 900 on all of the Greenwich Library items. Districts 2, 4, and 11 were unrepresented on that vote. The Greenwich Library budget covers the main library, Byram Schubert, and Coscob. Principal increases in contractual payroll and related expenses, accounting for 4.1 of the 7.7 year-on-year increase. Account 702 is the Peterson wing of the Greenwich Library, which is financed through private contributions. This is $1,214,793, paid for by a gift to the library from the Peterson Foundation, which in turn is given to the town to be appropriated to account 702. The second and third resolutions on page 7 relate to the library's Peterson wing and authorize the town to accept private gifts. and appropriate them to the library, and authorizes the library to allocate the money among the 702 accounts. We approve this as part of the general library approval. The town has also budgeted $944,000 contribution towards the approximately $3.8 million rehabilitation costs of the Byram Schubert Library. They expect to complete fundraising in the next few months and begin construction in July or August. The library is expected to be done, Byram Schubert is expected to be down for about a year. There is also an RFID tag system for inventory control, tagging books. Account 710 is the Perrott Library in Old Greenwich, $1,401,006. Again, approved 900 with 2, 4, and 11 unrepresented. There are 3 one-time items, but all of which fall below the $25,000 limit. A copier, a mail system, electronic mail system, and a roof air conditioner are $29,000 in the aggregate of the operating budget increase. But for those, the increase would have been about 4.6%, principally in payroll. The capital budget for Perrott also includes $35,000 in information technology upgrades. We considered account 801, 57210 in the Parks and Rec budget, which is the town's contribution or payment to Bruce Museum pursuant to its January 1992 management agreement between the town and Bruce Museum, Inc. This is a 3% increase over the current year, $705,557, and recommended approval 1100, District 2 unrepresented. We also considered account 925, which is a $9 million appropriation from the general fund to the capital non-recurring fund. That's what it is. That money taken out of the general fund, put in capital non-recurring, and goes to pay capital costs. We voted 1100 to recommend that. We also considered some other resolutions that are in the budget book. The last resolution on page 7 authorizes the town to borrow $2.5 million. After a discussion of alternatives, we voted 10-1-3 to recommend this. District 3 preferred juggling projects and waiting longer to start borrowing. Mr. Byrne reported that the Legislative and Rules Committee would move to eliminate duplicate language on page 2 and to make minor changes in the resolution's introduction to conform it to the others. We also approved the first whereas on page 9, transferring unexpended capital funds on lapsed projects back to the capital and non-recurring fund, 1100. Again, at the appropriate time, I have an amendment to the gift resolution.
Okay, 1 minute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brady, could I see you, please? Pamela Frederick, Chair of our Finance Committee.
Good evening. Good evening. The Finance Committee met on Monday, May 1st, and it's a rather long meeting, ran until 12:30, so I appreciate the committee's work. There were 12 districts present. The committee was charged with reviewing quite a number of budgets, so bear with me. The Finance and Comptroller, Retirement and Pensions, Tax Assessor and Tax Collector, Fixed Charges and OPEB, Capital Plan, as well as trust funds. We met with a number of town officials during the course of March and April for those responsible for the budget and prepare reports reflecting these discussions. Each department was then reviewed by the full committee when we met on the 1st. So I'll just go through the items. Finance in the Comptroller's area. This item was presented by Bob Chiappetta and Bob Tuttle, and Pete Mynarski was available for questions. No major changes occurred in this budget except that the town is elected to pay a bank fee rather than hold large compensating balances. While deemed revenue neutral, it was felt that the Finance Department, by the Finance Department and the BET, that the town would be better off, and I think the committee generally agreed with that. Retirement and pension funds. This item was presented by me and Bob May, with Jim Lavin, the retirement administrator, and Ed Gomo available for questions. While there was little change in the department's budget, there are several major changes in the retirement system, which I'll briefly summarize. First, the defined benefit plan was frozen for the GEMA and Teamsters and will now include a COLA. It is now being replaced by a defined contribution plan for all new employees. Second, the town contribution for the retirement system, as reflected in fixed charges, has increased fourfold from $688,000 last year to nearly $4 million this year. The primary factor for this contributing to this increase was an ad hoc COLA increase approved by the BET and Retirement Board last year, which triggered an immediate cost impact of $1.5 million and a longer-term estimated impact of $15 million. The exclusion of the RTM from this process will be explored further during the June meeting and presented by the Special Committee on Retirement Benefits. I believe you received the report this month. In addition to the ad hoc, the cost of the COLA and the GEMA and Teamsters contract has added significantly to this year's contribution, as did the amortization of prior year investment losses. In the town's favor, there were several demographic assumptions that were changed that resulted in reducing the contribution this year by nearly $2 million. But for that, the increase actually would have been 10 times up to, it would have been a $6 million contribution this year. Another department review was the tax assessor and tax collector. This item was presented by Bob Chiappetta and Bob Tuttle. The revaluation was discussed with its impact on residents. The assessor is seeking to now conduct a revaluation biannually instead of every 4 years. The BET will be reviewing this at their June budget meeting. It was also noted that the cost of the revaluation is included in the capital plan, and although it's not a capital item, this is a legacy treatment dating back to the revals occurred much less frequently, and it's recommended that this be added back in the assessor's budget to properly reflect their operating costs. To note, the state turned down a bill to tax motor vehicles at the state level rather than the local level, so continue to be taxed by Greenwich. For tax collection, it was noted that while Greenwich has a 2-year delinquency rate, it is substantially better and above the average, where it can be as high as 11 years, so congratulations for that. The fixed charges and OPEB fund. Gordon Ennis and Paul Curtis presented this to the committee, while Ed Gomo, Pete Mynarski, and Larry Simon from the BET responded to questions. It was noted that $170,000 in health care costs was moved from fixed charges and out of the OPEB fund moved to fixed charges and out of the OPEB fund. Greenwich has been able to contain costs, which are driven largely by medical and pharmacy inflation. There were no increases in insurance costs. Do the capital plan last, I think. For the trust funds, the item was presented by Mimi Relia and Joe Williams. And those include the sewer fund, school lunch fund, the parking fund, as well as Griffith Harris, which I'll refer to as Griff. The sewer, the town policy is to assess 100% of costs of a project to the residents receiving the benefit. Some residents are challenging certain costs of the North Mianus project and feel that they are town costs, so that will be, I'm sure, revisited by the RTM at some point. The lunch fund, the lunch fund is now paying the town $301,000 to reimburse the cost of benefits, and this is a cost that previously had been borne solely by the town, whereas they should have in the past been allocated to the lunch fund. So that was a benefit for the town. In terms of parking, $750,000 was unutilized in the budget for the parking garage, and this will be discussed also at the June BET meeting. I think they'll have a full meeting in June. Parking and, not that you don't have them other months, parking and traffic plan to make we were told plan to make a joint resolution to move this money into next year's budget. It was also noted that monies in the fund should be separated, and this discrepancy will be used in uses will need to be sorted out, because it's believed that by some who've made presentations at our meeting that the remaining $4 million in the fund cannot be spent for non-parking related costs, and that's referring to the traffic patrols. In terms of the GRIF, they have raised $125,000 of the $500,000 being sought from contributions, and this is needed to start and complete a new pro shop and starter box project that has been envisioned. If less than the $500,000 is raised, the project will be scaled back. A fundraiser is planned for June, and currently the GRIF has 2 to 3 years remaining, as you may recall, in repaying the loan for the irrigation system. Once this repayment has been made, the new $500,000 loan would then begin to be repaid. In terms of OPEB, we were asked to vote on the OPEB expenditure of $5.5 million, and Larry Simon, BET member, presented this item to us, and the committee voted 12-0-0 in favor of supporting this expenditure. In terms of bonding, we were also asked to vote this item, and it was presented by the BET budget chair, Stephen Walco, and Larry Simon. The funds raised by this initial bonding will be used to shore up, actually to pay for part of a capital budget item, and then the money that it's freed up would then be used to shore up the reserve levels, raising them to $4 million, which are now considered very low given the size of the capital budget. These reserves, as I mentioned, would be associated with, I'm sorry, not the reserves, the $2.5 million would be associated with one capital project. Concern was raised that the $2.5 million is raising that as a bond is inefficient and could be met instead by obtaining a line of credit, and should the money be needed for the reserve, it could then be drawn down. The BET offered that the cost of raising the fund this year, the bonds this year, will be offset by interest earned, and that it should therefore be neutral, if not beneficial. Though this initial bond amount is low, it is anticipated that the town will raise significant debt over the 10-year capital plan, and as mentioned by the BET chair, that amount will be $114 million over the course of 2006 through 2013, if approved in subsequent budgets. Though this initial amount is low, this will be a significant amount of debt, and is anticipated being paid off in a 5-year pay-as-you-go methodology. The point was raised that ultimately this is the vote on the bond is a vote on how well the town chooses to maintain its assets. If at the same level as would be possible with planned bonding, then the town would be required to either raise taxes or use bonding. So you have two choices. The third choice, however, is without either, then the town is choosing to slow the rate of improvement or to allow the assets to deteriorate as they have in the past. The committee addressed this issue through a vote to remove the bonding language from the resolution, and that vote was 2-9-1, with districts 2 and 8 in favor of removal and District 9 abstaining. So the committee, in effect, by voting down this resolution, voted in favor of supporting the $2.5 million bonding.
1 minute, please.
Okay. We did not vote on resolution items. There are a number of unclear or uncertainties, and so we decided to not vote on those, and none were specific to our committee. In terms of the budget, the committee voted to support the budget without reduction or removal. For those departments that were referred to us, we voted 12-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. Bob Richardson, Chair of the Special Committee on Nathaniel Witherell.
Mr. Moderator, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The Special Committee met and took up this budget in December when we reviewed the Long Range Plan 2006 submitted by the Nathaniel Witherell Board. For fiscal year '07, Nathaniel Witherell expects revenues on a traditional departmental basis of $19.3 million, which is an increase of 5.8%, and expenses reported again on a traditional departmental basis of $15.8 million, up 5%. On an overall enterprise basis, including the assignment of employee benefits and other costs associated with Nathaniel Witherell at various town hall departments, an operating loss of $2.4 million is expected for the fiscal year, virtually the same as budgeted for fiscal '06. Now, what's different about this budget? There's not much different in it, but what's not seen is the result yet to come of a very serious labor negotiation to be reopened in July, in which the town and the unions will have an opportunity to make a major effort on the difficult issue of aligning wages and benefits more closely with those of the Fairfield County averages for the nursing home industry. The objective is to make a major contribution to the elimination of the operating losses and to contribute to a modest but sustainable positive cash flow over a period of years. If, in fact, these objectives are achieved, funds will consequently be available to amortize the cost of a much-needed renovation rebuilding program, which is now being developed by the board. The new building program will replace the $45 million proposal, which the board has taken off the table. And it is expected that the new plan will cost in the range of $20 to $30 million. Thus, there are serious challenges ahead this year for the labor negotiator, Mr. Cava, and the unions, the employees, and there are serious challenges for the board in coming up with a workable and affordable plan to rehabilitate the physical premises that is so much badly needed. We didn't vote on the budget when it was presented to us in December. We think it is appropriate, however, and that is wholly consistent with the long-range plan, the objectives of which are laudable in themselves, and we hope we're going to see that the actual budget, when realized at the end of next fiscal year, will have been less as a result of the negotiations to take place shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Isaacson, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Fellow members of the RTM, we examined 5 different budgets last Tuesday night, first being the Commission on Aging. I have to characterize this, I think, as the little engine that could. It's a very small department, as you know, but has been intensively involved in educating seniors about the Medicare Part D plan. And I won't give you a litany of numbers, but there were 24 public education programs for 1,141 people attending, plus volunteers and providing counseling service. So they've been very busy. We voted 11-0-0 with District 11 absent on that budget. The Health Department was not a controversial budget in our view. They have a budget increase of 3.8%. There are some pass-throughs that they have had in their budget in the past that are no longer there. For example, liberation programs, the $80,000 that the town has provided has been going through the Department of Health budget. Now it is going through the Board of Social Services budget. But there were no big items, but I would, if you're interested to know the breadth of what they do in the Department of Health, I suggest that you call them on the phone, because you will sit there for a very long time listening to the litany of various items that you can buzz in on, and the things that they do. It's very enlightening just to sit there and listen just once. 1100 with District 11 absent again. In GEMS, we had Charlie Tufts visit us on Tuesday night, and I must say that I was pleased as I walked in the building to see a sign on the entryway that says AED installed. That's the defibrillator program, and they have installations now and training in most public buildings, beaches, golf course, police, fire, middle schools, high school, and newly installed in 11 elementary schools. I was also interested that there is a pilot program. The First Congregational Church of Greenwich has installed a defibrillator, and they've received training from the GEMS people. Apparently, there are many, many calls for GEMS from churches, and I will not editorialize on that. You can draw your own conclusions about the reason for, for that instance. We also looked at, we voted 1100, District 11 absent again. Nathaniel Witherall we also examined, and I will not repeat what Bob Richardson has already told you. It is our understanding that the LAUNA contract is still in negotiation. One of the things that struck me as we looked through the staffing levels is that the rehab staff is decreased by 2 and the physical therapy by 1. And that seemed incongruous based on the fact that they are trying to increase their rehab program. We were told, however, that that has been outsourced now and is being done by an outfit called Sundance Rehabilitation Services. 1100 again with District 11 absent. Most of our time Tuesday night was spent on the social services budget. This budget is, first of all, based on the present structure, and so will be revised as necessary as they move toward restructuring the department. A new commissioner, hopefully, will be hired this month. And it is thought that the restructuring will begin in earnest shortly thereafter. 70% of their budget is subject to quarterly release by the BET as they report progress toward implementation of the Brody-Weiser-Burns recommendation, and also on the use of the Evolve software to identify needs and provide more effective and efficient delivery of services. They have 7 full-time vacancies and 2 part-time vacancies that have not been filled for up to a year. And this is what caused most of our discussion last Tuesday night about this. Apparently, they have not filled them because of a hiring freeze, and as I say, there was a lively debate about that, and by some it was felt, and not just our committee, but a couple of people in the audience, that there should be a deletion from their budget, at least to send a message that we would want them to be fully staffed. There was a motion within our committee to delete $100,000 from the social service budget, and but that motion was defeated 4-6-1. And it was noted that the commissioner was one of those vacancies, and as soon as that person is hired, other vacancies will probably be filled, as I've noted before. Subsequent to our meeting, all of our committee received an email from Alma Rutgers, and as I say, she sent it to the entire committee, and noted that there's one important piece of information, and I wanted to provide your committee, and I'll skip a little bit. In Human Resources budget, there is a negative amount of $530,937, which is there to reflect the planned elimination of 9 positions in the town overall. The elimination of these positions over the course of the 07 fiscal year has been promised by the First Selectman in order to keep the town's overall head count neutral at the end of the year, as the current budget adds civilian dispatch and zoning inspector positions. The proposed reduction of $100,000 that was defeated in your committee would have created a $100,000 shortfall, shortfall in the overall budget, as some of the 9 positions that the First Selectman might eliminate could be in social services. The reduction in funding that some members of your committee wanted would have been duplicative of the negative number in the Human Resources budget. Our vote on the social service budget, which was taken before seeing this email from the BET member, was 8-1, District 11 absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Franklin Bloomer with the report of our Land Use Committee.
Good evening, fellow town meeting members, Mr. Moderator. The Land Use Committee met last Monday evening. We considered 7 codes from the departmental budgets and a number of codes from the capital schedules in the proposed 2006-07 budget. We voted only on the codes that were assigned to us, or perhaps I should say that were intended to be assigned to us. The assignments in the exhibits section of the budget book assigned 2 codes to us that don't exist, that aren't in the budget book, and did not assign to us a number of things that a number of codes that we thought were relevant to us, such as land use administration. So we looked at what we thought we probably ought to look at. What we considered were the following. From the departmental budgets, we looked at 6 codes, all of which are in general government that relate to the land use agencies. These are Code 161, the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals. For that code, we had Jim Maloney, our zoning enforcement officer, who provides administrative support to the Zoning Board of Appeals. We looked at Code 170, the Condemnation Commission. We actually had nobody with us to talk to us about that rather modest appropriation, $25,000. A member of our committee, Bob Perry, is actually a member of the commission, but unfortunately he missed the meeting, so we weren't able to pick his brain. We looked at 171, which is the Planning and Zoning Commission. We had Diane Fox, our town planner, to help us with that. Code 172, the Conservation Commission. Denise Savageau, our Conservation Director, was there. Code 173, Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. Mark Massoud, the Executive Director of that agency, was there. And Code 174, which is the Land Use Administration section, and again, Diane Fox assisted us there. We have traditionally looked at and had assigned to us one code from the Department of Public Works budget. That's Code 312, Highway, Streets, and Bridges. We had Dave Thompson, the town engineer, and Joe Roberto, the head of the Highway Department, to help us with that. That section has traditionally been assigned to our section because of capital appropriations that come up under that code heading. And this goes back to the time when the capital appropriations and the operating appropriations were all together. And our interest in the operational side of that code is less really than the capital side. We actually looked at a number of capital schedules, including 312, where there are a number of items that are relevant to land use. We also looked at 4 codes outside of the 312 area. Code 302-956, which is the code COSCOB power plant site remediation, which was the topic that we looked at a month ago. And 3 codes that have the same number, 345-956, the Holly Hill Master Plan, and the downtown municipal parking facility, neither of which had any funds appropriated for this year, but have funding coming up in the future. And finally, the public safety facility. When we came to vote, we voted only on the items assigned to us, or we thought intended to be assigned to us. Our vote on all of those taken together was 11 in favor, none opposed, with no abstentions. District 12 was absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, the Legislative and Rules Committee takes up two budget items. One is the Law Department budget, and the other is the Probate Court budget. The Law Department budget, I would first just make these initial comments. Some people say it may not be wise to have a committee made up largely of lawyers looking at the spending of other lawyers. There are those that say it's pretty much like asking Count Dracula to be in charge of the Red Cross Blood Bank. That limitation aside, we took up the Law Department budget. Appearing to discuss the budget was our town attorney, Wayne Fox. We noted the 33% increase in line item 51,400, which is for outside counsel, together with a decrease in salary expense of some 8.6%. Attorney Fox explained that our salary costs will be down for this coming year because Attorney Hayden Garish left the Law Department and he is not being replaced. The outside counsel fees are considerably higher because Attorney Fox is being paid through that line item, not as a salaried employee, but instead through the budget item of outside counsel. Mr. Fox explained he has been designated an officer by the Selectmen and the BET, and his contract extends through August of 2006. There followed a discussion with BET member Nancy Barton, who was present for our discussions, who said that the method by which Attorney Fox is paid will be looked at in the coming months, and this issue will be revisited at the conclusion or near the conclusion of Attorney Fox's current contract. The overall budget request for the Law Department is within the guidelines, 3.2% higher than the current year's budget. Our vote was 10-0-0 with Districts 3 and 9 absent. We took up the Probate Court budget last Monday evening. There was nobody there on behalf of the Probate Court. However, their budget request is the same as this year's budget. There is no increase of any sort. The cost of providing office space, furniture, equipment, and office supplies is statutorily imposed on each town by state law to provide for a probate court. The salaries and all benefits are paid for by the fees that are generated by the court, and therefore their budget requests are minimal. Our vote with respect to this item was 10-0-0 with 2 districts absent. We also took up the budget resolutions. All of the new budget resolutions are in boldface in the book. And at the appropriate time, Mr. Moderator, I will make a motion to delete some provisions and make some Scrivener error corrections to other ones. Our vote on the budget resolutions as amended was 10-0-0 with 2 districts absent.
Thank you. Karen Sotacon, Chair of our Parks and Recreation Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, fellow RTM members and guests. Our committee, with all districts present, met last week with Joe Siciliano and all of the Parks and Rec department heads, including Peter Mandris, Bruce Spayman, Fred Walters, and Dave Deandra and Lou Berlingo of the Griff Harris Golf Course, and Tom Greco, the administrative supervisor from Parks and Rec. Also joining us were Mike Mason from the BET, Sue Wallerstein, assistant superintendent of schools, and Steve Anderson from the Board of Education. Mr. Lash also stopped in. We started by briefly looking at the budget resolution on page 4 of the call in bold print, the new one, which is about Parks and Rec reimbursing of funds from vendors who rent facilities. It had been brought to our attention by Doug Wells that the Legislative and Rules Committee at their meeting had voted to delete this resolution due to the unclear language. I understand, as you just heard, that there will be a redraft presented later on. So we did not vote on it, we just noted it. On to the Parks and Rec budget. This past April, Tom Greco made a budget presentation to our committee. The committee then divided up the budget as it always does, assigning specific areas to members. And so last week, when we met with Joe and his department, we shared our findings. There were no recommendations to delete any items, any amounts. Clarifications of specific allocations were requested, with satisfactory explanations given to us. To summarize the budget, revenues will increase by 7.8% over last year due to the rate of adjustments and participation, bringing revenue to $3,459,906. Operating costs will increase by 4%. It's interesting to look at how the 4% figure is arrived at. You can kind of go backwards. If you deduct fixed charges of $25,000 for one heavy equipment operator full-time, you bring down the increase in the operating budget to 3.8%. If you deduct 3 new initiatives, which total $131,945, you bring it down to 2.8%. These 3 new initiatives are $12,500 for background checks on staff supporting town-run recreation programs. This is for a service that provides protection for children in town programs. Secondly, $40,000 for additional part-time dock masters, which is in compliance with the recent audit committee recommendation. And thirdly, the third new initiative is $79,445 to cover staff, materials, and services for the reopening of the Western Greenwich Civic Center, which will operate on a 7-day per week basis. And finally, if you deduct the department revenue, you will arrive at a net cost of operation, which is only a 2.3% increase over last year. The department has done a good job of controlling costs, and our committee was satisfied. To the CIP, I'd like to review what they have included. Account 816 for the ice skating rink will replace skate sharpening equipment for $15,000, and the Hamel Rink scoreboard will replace for $25,000. Account 822 is playground maintenance for $54,000. This is part of a plan that between now and 2016 will total $535,000. There's a geese management pilot program, $35,000, and park improvements for $105,000. This is a tennis and basketball maintenance program that over 10 years will cost $1,050,000. There are some vehicles which are all standard replacements: a mid-size sedan for $24,000, a utility tractor for $52,000, a 3/4-ton pickup and 2 snowplows for $72,000, and 3 utility work machines for snow removal at $135,000. In account 823, park improvement athletic field rehab will be $180,000. This is a 10-year plan that will total $1,800,000. Park improvement for baseball fields, $210. This is a one-time, one-year expense for standardizing the components of all fields. Backstops will be repaired or replaced. Safety fences, player benches, bleachers, etc. will all be brought up to equal standards for all the baseball fields in town. Under marine maintenance, account 832, replacement of icebreaker boat, $55,000. High-pressure steam clean equipment, $15,000. This is for cleaning hulls. Replacement of police dock and pier, $30,000 in the Baldwin Park area. Under beaches, a 4x4 carry-all diesel vehicle, $14,000, and Island Beach Ferry electrical upgrade, $50,000. We had an extensive conversation about the condition of the ferry boat and the necessity to have it operating under full compliance with the Coast Guard. Under account 834, harbors and boating facilities, finger slips, $20,000. That's an ongoing project you'll see in the budgets year to year, and retrofitting landing craft for $50,000. This is a total of $1,208,000. Next we looked at the Griffith Golf Course. As you know, the golf course is self-sustaining from revenue generated from membership, greens fees, the pro shop, etc., and operates as a revolving fund. For the 2006-07 operating budget, revenue from admissions, membership, rentals, concession, capital surcharge, and interest is up from $1,649,000 to $1,787,600. Because you remove the capital non-reoccurring amount of the $500,000 gift and $500,000 loan proceeds from last year. This is my interpretation of the figures, removing that $1 million and comparing apples to apples. And total expenses are down from $2,604,514 to $2,177,736, which is a 16.4% reduction. This leaves a Net figure of $390,136 with a fund balance of $859,666 at the June 30 beginning of the year, minus the $390,136. The balance then at the end of the year should become $469,530. There were no surprises in the golf court budget. The committee was very satisfied with the presentation. Regarding their capital budget, the capital items are as follows. Account 914 Sidewinder mower for $31,000. 914 Fairway mower, $43,000. We were told the average replacement is every 4 seasons for this piece of equipment. Account 920 Auxiliary generator transfer switch, $25,000. This was explained, this is being added to avoid damage to the greens during power outages when water can't be pumped up from the wells for irrigation of the golf course. Account 983 cart path renovations, which are ongoing, and by 2010 will total $110,000. Master plan, account 983, $35,000 for architects' works on grounds, and 983 master plan projects actual implementation, $400,000. The capital total for the GRIF is $559,000. Satisfied with all of this information, we voted on the entire budgets with one vote, which was 12-0-0. I would like to thank the committee for their participation in doing the review of these figures, and I especially would like to thank Joe Siciliano and his department, and Dave DeAndrea and Lou Berlingo at the GRIF for their cooperation with the committee's budget review. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Kavee with the report of our Public Works Committee.
The RTM Public Works Committee met on Monday, May 1st, to consider the town's fiscal 2006-2007 budget. All 12 districts were represented, with districts 1 and 4 represented by alternates, and 3 additional alternates were present, 2 from District 8 and 1 from District 11. Also present through the meeting were First Selectman Jim Lash, BET Budget Committee member Mike Mason, Board of Education members Ginny Gwynn, and Vice Chairman and Steve Leparco, Board of Education Director of Facilities Tony Byrne, Glenville Fire Company Second Assistant Chief James Heavey, and the Department of Public Works Commissioner Lloyd Hubbs and Deputy Commissioner Bob Comm. The $2.2 million capital project to upgrade the Glenville Fire Station was presented by Assistant Chief James Heavey. He described the work needed to bring the facility to code and to accommodate more modern, larger, and heavier vehicles. Staffing quarter deficiencies similar to the Coscob firehouse will be remedied, and fortunately the Glenville Firehouse does not present the historic district designation aspects of the Coscob Fire Station. Questions from the committee regarded the scope and size of the Glenville project for cost comparison purposes. Tony Byrne presented the scope of the Board of Education DPW-related capital projects. Broadly speaking, the critical deficiencies of buildings, roofs, and boilers were selected to pare down a consultant's $151 million state of good repair study budget. Since the current 10-year capital plan is only $132 million, there was committee concern noted that perhaps the plan was not aggressive enough to catch up and or maintain a state of good repair. The Parkway School repaving is planned through DPW. Ongoing capital projects such as asbestos abatement and asbestos flooring work throughout the system will continue. The Hamilton Avenue school project it says his contract is nearly signed. It may have actually been signed by now. The architectural and engineering budget item for the Glenville school renovation is critical to get to the next stage of decision-making for the project. The Glenville School Building Committee may select an architect this week. Mr. Byrne identified that the system has shifted from a school-based renovation process to a project-based process to extend the working lives of the facilities in conjunction with ongoing improved maintenance. Group discussion occurred relative to a town-wide standardization of equipment facilities, standards and performance criteria, such as energy efficiency, such as common boilers through all buildings, commonly manufactured boilers through all buildings throughout the town, not only school buildings. The RTM Public Works Committee then turned its attention to a brief review of the DPW operating budget. It is noted that the DPW General Fund operating budget, General Fund pages 63 through 77, contains substantial negative numbers under Personal Services Code number 51920. These apparent expense reductions for the DPW sub-departments reflected budgeted work to be performed by DPW for parking services or for the parking fund. In reality, they reflect contributions, that is income, not offsetting expenses transferred from the parking fund to the DPW departments. The expense items actually reside within the parking fund. The parking fund acts as a general contractor, and the general fund departments act as subcontractors. In fact, the source of the funds for the transfers comes from running the parking fund at a significant deficit as it is drawn down to ultimate extinction. As expense reductions, they cause an understatement, a distortion of DPW expenses for work performed by the DPW staff. Tonight, the RTM will be asked to approve those reduced operating budget line items for those DPW departments. The distortion understates the work contribution of DPW staff, but has no impact on the mill rate on the general fund mill rate. In addition to the above-mentioned transfers, Highway Leak Collection Department 313 shows an unusual budgeted personal services account. The 100 account contains a single entry, $320,000, but no head count or salaries. Only $320,000 in work transfers to other departments. The other department is Highway, Streets, and Bridges 312, and the transfers are simply an accounting convenience with no net effect on the total DPW operating budget. As expected, the DPW budget shows significant increases in electric service, fuel for heating, and waste removal services. Mr. Lash indicated that the budgeted line item increase for waste removal roughly matches an indicated interim appropriation forthcoming this June. The BET restructured the First Selectman's proposed sidewalk budget. A separate sidewalk maintenance capital item of $250,000 was merged with a $400,000 capital appropriation for street maintenance to result in a single $650,000 capital appropriation. Multiple safe route and sidewalk projects were merged for different schools, particularly, were merged into a single $1,071,000 project. These changes provide for more flexibility to stage the separate projects, separate and related projects. There were questions as to the waste removal projection. I guess I mentioned that already. And Mr. Lash indicated an interim appropriation for that. Item 302-956 for the Coscob Power Plant is for design, not for remediation, as some people had the impression. Current funding covers cap design. A new request would provide for landscape architectural design services only, as remediation is an 0708 item. The dam maintenance item is for town-owned dams only. The annual asbestos abatement program is at an acceptable funding level given past needs. There was a suggestion that there should be common procurement standards for maximum life efficiency and minimum operating costs throughout the town.
1 minute, please.
All right. The police facility was discussed. Some funding is in place to get through abatement, demolition, and utility. Concern was noted about the extent of budgeted escalation. The $234,000 capital for the J.J. Kennedy Fleet Sewer Development was moved from sewer maintenance to sewer improvement. Let me get to the end of this then. The current ask for $2.5 million of bonding, and next year $14 million. No points were made regarding the language. Mr. Mason indicated that the need to bridge current significant capital demands in light of the mill rate and grand list. The only motion for the meeting was to approve the budget resolutions as in item number 3 on the call. All districts were represented. The vote was 12-0-0, and the meeting adjourned at 11 p.m.
Thank you very much. Greg Fruman, Chair of our Town Services Committee.
Are you guys having fun yet? Town Services met on Tuesday, May 2nd to consider the 2006-07 budget. All budgets that were referred to us and all resolutions related to our committee were presented, discussed, voted on, and approved with one exception. Town Services plans to make a motion at the appropriate time to reduce the 201 Fire Department administration budget by $50,000 from $1,221,641 down to $1,171,641. As amended, we voted on the Fire Department budget also in favor of the Fire Department budget. Within the general government section, we looked at and voted on 7 distinct objects: representative town meeting, the Office of the First Selectman, purchasing, administrative services, human resources, registrar of voters, and town clerk. We also reviewed the resolution which relates to the town clerk. We voted on all of them in favor. The total of the general government was $4,638,150. During our discussion of the town clerk, it was commented that town clerk's budget is $595,000. They generate $8.5 million in revenue to the town. It was suggested there should be a Carmilla Budkins Day. We discussed that. We tabled it for now. Am I going to get some golf balls out of that?
She's thinking there should be a bonus. But
Yes, I'm sure she is. That's the next negotiation. The Fire Department budget was presented by Assistant Chief Mike Puderbaugh and Chief Sandy Anderson. We voted in favor of the total $11,215,168, reduced by $50,000 per our proposed motion. Our vote was 12-0-0 as amended. We went on to the motion itself was made by District 5 to reduce, as I explained. After discussion, we voted 8 in favor, 4 against, and 0 abstentions, with Districts 1, 3, 10, and 11 voting against the motion. Again, when it's appropriate, we'll bring the motion to the floor. We talked about the Fire Department capital projects. We voted on a total of $907,000 in capital projects. We voted 12-0-0 in favor of those capital projects. They are specifically $514,000 for a full-size SUV, $39,000 for a full-size SUV, and $475,000 for a new 15-gallon pumper, 1,500-gallon pumper. We also discussed the Banksville Fire Department capital appropriation, $343,000 to replace fire engine 72, and the final $100,000 donation that we've agreed for over the 5 years towards the Banksville Firehouse construction. With regard to the Round Hill Firehouse, there's $50,000 in the capital appropriation for an oil water separator. It should be noted that within the CIP, the fire department is scheduled to replace one major piece of equipment at about $500,000 each year for the next 10 years. They're trading in existing equipment before it reaches the end of its useful life. By doing so, they're getting about 50 cents on the dollar back in trade, which can be applied and is being applied to the new equipment. Also, Chief Dan Rozoa presented the $2.2 million budget for the Glenville Fire Station interior upgrade. It's already been touched on, so there's no reason to go over it again. We were quite impressed with it. We are in favor of it. We next took up the police department budget. It was presented by Chief Jim Walters. We voted in favor of a total of $16,214,031 within the budget. There were no objections. We voted 12-0-0. We also took up the capital items with regard to the police department for a total of $284,000, voted 12-0-0. This has to do with basically 12 new cars for the police department. Though we were not assigned the $33 million for the police administration building, we did discuss it. We did not vote on it. We also reviewed and discussed the 6 resolved items as they relate to the police department. Again, voted in favor of all of them, 12-0-0. We next took up the parking fund. It was presented to us by Jim Lash because, unfortunately, we took so long that Alan Corey had to go elsewhere. We appreciate his time for waiting around as long as he could. We voted in favor of the full $2,452,167,000 within the budget. Our vote was 12-0-0. Lastly, our committee took up the item resolution with regard to the CIP and the $2.5 million. We did not vote on it. However, the general sense of our committee was that we were mostly in favor of it. Finally, we did spend some time discussing the capital reserve fund and the line item specifically about transfers in, and the fact that the BET plans to continue to build upon prior years, transferring in additional funds each year to help keep our reserves at appropriate levels. That was our whole report.
Thank you. Vince DeMarco, Chair of our Transportation Committee.
Good evening, fellow members. Mr. Chairman. The committee met last Tuesday evening as scheduled and took up the budgets referred to us and then others not referred. As always, we took up the General Fund Department Code 380, Vehicle Maintenance. Fleet Manager Betty Link was with us, and our Budget Subcommittee of Alan Small and Sabine Schoenberg presented to us copies of detailed materials that Betty provided to them previously. Overall, her budget request has increased nearly 10%, approximately $240,000 over last year. There is no increase in the number of personnel, but an upgrade of several employees means an increase in regular salaries of 8%, or $67,000. The bulk of the increase, as expected, are actual and projected sharp increases in costs of fuel, parts, and tires. The current fuel contract expires at the end of June, and this budget anticipates an increase in gasoline from $1.72 to $1.96 per gallon at 215,000 gallons projected. That is $51,000. And diesel from $1.45 to $2.12 per gallon at 130,000 gallons projected. That's $87,000. Add in a 10% increase for lubricants for a total of $144,000. It has been decided due to market volatility that that for now fuel contracts will be for 3 months at a time. Will be signed for 3 months at a time. Also, the cost of parts is budgeted at an increase of 8% or $18,000, and tires 46% or $32,000. As you know, the Fleet Department was one of the first to undertake outcome-based budgeting several years ago. It was noted that the outcome-based target for fuel efficiency of 3% in 05-06 was an average of 9.6 miles per gallon, and the fleet fell short at 8.6 miles per gallon. In comparison, the average 01-02 miles per gallon was 11.5. The primary reason for this is that our vehicles, our fleet vehicles, have become larger and typically less fuel efficient. This also means they probably require more lubricants and fluids, larger tires, chains, etc., and everything wears out faster. The mission of the Fleet Department is to operate a well-maintained, cost-effective, and efficient fleet management system, ensuring that the town's vehicles and equipment are reliable, safe, and suitable for the job function, economical for the town to own, and operated in an environmentally responsible manner. The Transportation Committee is aware that our Fleet Director has worked to develop operating procedures and policy recommendations and recommends the most efficient vehicles for replacement according to the job function given to her by the requesting departments, and painstakingly monitors and documents everything. We fully support her efforts to green up the town's fleet with more efficient vehicles and hybrids where appropriate, compliance with laws on idling, stricter use of the motor pool, and other voluntary fuel conservation efforts. Next up was the DPW Traffic Engineering Division Code 318, which continues to be funded completely by the Parking Fund. Traffic Engineer Gara Garabedian, Commissioner Lloyd Hubbs, and our first selectman were there to answer questions. This overall budget request is up 20% over last year by approximately $200,000, nearly all of the increase in capital items. $225,000 for a backup power supply for the traffic signal system, the first of 3 to be requested in successive years, $40,000 for speed display units, and another $50,000 for a service truck. Part of the offset to this is expected to be from work to be done for other departments, but none of these items has anything to do with parking. It was made clear to us by all of the officials in attendance that they don't see any reason to continue to fund this department out of the parking fund except for the purpose of draining the fund. Of course, we were reminded that this practice was the will of the RTM beginning in 1998 via the Landsman motion that successfully cut the budget of the traffic department from the general fund. We recognize that the Parking Services Charter Resolution passed if it had passed the RTM last month, this action would have been reversed, and the traffic department would again be funded out of the general fund. But being aware that the Charter Resolution will likely come before us again in June, we chose not to chance budget bedlam by offering a motion to cut the budget tonight. The committee was also made aware that the department is doing all it can to fill 2 important positions that have been vacant in this division for most of the year. We didn't see any other problems with the budget. We then took up the Parking Fund Code 219, Parking Services, and had Parking Services Director Alan Corey help us with this review along with the First Selectman. 219, which in prior years was the code for police traffic control. Though it is now a major department code with a clear focus, the traffic control police on Greenwich Avenue will still be funded out of the budget to the tune of approximately $330,000. This, in addition to other transfers that might be deemed inappropriate, amounts to about 25% of the entire budget. What is even more confusing is the fact that this overall budget is for 25% less than last year. We also found one other thing, that there may have been an overestimation for overtime services, but the committee felt it was better to monitor this than to challenge it. The bulk of the true parking-related expenditures will be for maintenance of parking areas, though there's no request for capital parking improvements in the budget this year, and the revenue is projected to increase. The parking fund balance is projected to be spent down almost $800,000. We gave Mr. Corey our vote of confidence, and we look forward to working with him when he begins to craft his own budget from the get-go. The committee then concentrated on budgets not assigned to us, first with DPW Commissioner Hubbs on Highway Code 312, Streets and Bridges. This budget request overall is 3% above last year, with no change in headcount and just a 3.5% increase in regular salaries. The budget also was offset by work transfers from the parking fund in excess of $400,000, over which there can be little argument. Our primary interest in reviewing this budget is from the perspective of actual transportation improvements, such as sidewalks, the Safe Routes program, physical road improvements, including traffic calming measures, and soon-to-come implementation of area-wide improvements in Byram and the Central Business District, and the bicycle master plan. The committee was supportive of this budget, and we're anxious to see that the results of these much-desired improvements will justify more of the same. Unlike in previous years, we did not ask for a representative from the Education Department, as our Budget Committee ascertained that the bus contract will not expire for another year, and that there are only small increases for transportation costs requested in this budget. Finally, we looked at the social services budget, and we asked that member Jim Boutel, president of TAG, come and speak to us about this. That budget this year is where the town is going to make its annual contribution to the Transportation Association of Greenwich, TAG, which will total $400,000 and includes $120,000 in services for adult day care, $80,000 for the senior center, and a portion of the Share the Fare taxi program. We voted on all of these items together, 11-0-0, with District 3 absent.
Thank you. That now brings us to the end of our committee reports. On item 3, our annual budget. Before we continue, I do want to extend my thanks and that of the RTM to the volunteers who make Channel 79 go and who are bringing this meeting live to the town tonight. Jenny Larkin up front on the camera and Paul Curtis in the back. Thank you very much. All right. We are operating tonight on the budget resolution that appears in the budget book, and it is labeled pages resolution number 1 through number 9. That budget resolution incorporates the dollar amounts that are found in the major object codes that appear in the RTM section of our budget book. The pages are labeled RTM 1 through RTM 20. So when we go through the budget, we will first go major object code by major object code. I will read each code on each of these pages. Our authority tonight is to approve the recommended appropriations that we receive from the BET, or we can reduce or delete within certain limits the numbers recommended by the BET. If there is a motion to reduce or to delete, that is a motion to amend the budget resolution. Because we do not take up motions to amend, if someone believes a proposed amendment is too high or not enough, it will not be possible to try and amend a pending motion to reduce, but it would be in order, after we disposed of that proposal, to offer a second motion to amend, which could have the effect of increasing. Let us say there is, let's take the RTM budget, which has a total amount of $9,500. If there was a motion to reduce this by $1,000 and someone thought it should only be reduced by $500, the second person could indicate that after a vote is taken on the first motion to reduce, that person would offer a second motion, which would have the effect, if we had adopted the first motion to reduce by $1,000, we would then have the authority to increase by up to, well, you know, in this case, we could increase by $500. The limits placed on us are that we cannot increase the appropriations above the amounts recommended in this budget. When we get to the schools, what we classify as the Class 1 expenditures, we don't go through line items in the school budget. Rather, we take, if there is to be any change to that budget, it is placed in the administration account. After I read all the major object codes, and let me caution our members, when I pass a major object code, it is not my intention, absent some extraordinary circumstance, to return to it. So if you intend to make a motion addressed to any part of the budget tonight, you must be present when I reach that part of the budget and let me know that you want to address a motion to that line item. If you are out of the room and we have passed it, it is not my intention to return to it. Now, there is one exception to that. We will, after we go through all the major object codes, take up proposed changes to the language, what we call the budget resolution language, the further resolves that appear in this resolution. And we do have some, the Legislative and Rules and Education Committee have indicated they are going to offer some proposed changes to that. If there is any change that is made to the budget resolution language that might affect an appropriation that we have already considered, under those circumstances, I think it would be appropriate that we might have to return. But we'll just see if that situation arises. But that would be the sole exception to our returning to the appropriations themselves. So, with that, I will now begin reviewing the line items that appear in RTM pages 1 through 20. And we begin with the general fund in the general government section, Code 101, Representative Town Meeting, 104, Emergency Operations, 105, Office of the First Selectman, 106, Purchasing, 107, Administrative Services, 109, Human Resources, 111, Probate Court, 120, Registrars of Voters, 130, BET Administration, 131, BET Retirement, 134, BET Information Technology, 135, Assessor, 136, Board of Assessment Appeals, 136, Tax Collector, 140, Law, 150, Town Clerk, 161, Planning Zoning Board of Appeals, 170, Condemnation Commission, 171, Planning and Zoning Commission, 172, Conservation Commission, 173, Inland Wetlands and Watercourses, 174, Land Use Administration, 195, Commission on Aging. Into the Fire Department, 201, Fire Administration. Mr. Fruman.
I'd like to make a motion to reduce 201 Fire Department Administration budget by $50,000 from $1,221,641 down to $1,171,641.
All right, that is offered on behalf of your committee, so it does not require a second. That motion to reduce Code 201 by the amount of $50,000, correct?
Yes.
Is now before us. Mr. Fruman?
The explanation: the fire department has over budgeted $100,000 within their 52210 water service account as a hedge against expected rate increases. As the fire department has received an estimate from the water company for the rest of 2006, which is half of our fiscal year, and considering that this estimate is in line with past year's expenditures, we are asking the RTM to delete $50,000 or half of the $100,000 over budgeted that would have covered a rate increase in the next 6 months. We are purposely leaving the other $50,000 contingency in this budget in case the rates do in fact go up in the first half of 2007.
Thank you. Discussion on the Town Services motion to reduce Code 201 by $50,000. Mary Ferry, District 5.
Now, this was Mary's idea, so she better not.
I went back through the last 4 or 5 years of budgets, and the water company has spent somewhere between $670,000 and $680,000 in each of those years. And for the last 4 to 5 years, they've budgeted $786,500. So maybe we should have taken something out earlier, but I urge you to take it out now.
Further discussion on the pending motion to reduce 201 by $50,000. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Town Services, motion to reduce Code 201 by $50,000 and proceed to poll your delegation. If there is a need after we tally that vote to come back to this particular code, we will do that. But for now, we will move on. Are there any other motions addressed to Code 201, Fire Administration? Moving on. 202, Fire Training. 203, Fire Alarm and Communication. 204, Fire Marshal. 205, Fire Fighting Force. 206, Fire Apparatus and Equipment. 207, Fire Department Buildings. 208, Banksville Fire Company. 209, Round Hill Fire. Brings us to the Police Department. 211, Police Administration. 213, Police General Services. 216, Criminal Investigation. 217, Uniformed Patrol. Department of Public Works. 301, Administration. 302, Engineering. 312, Highway, Streets, and Bridges. 313, Leaf Collection. 315, Board of Ed Maintenance. 321, Waste Disposal. 345, Building Construction and Maintenance. 351, Building Inspection. Vehicle Maintenance. 380, Fleet. Health Department. 401, Health Administration. 402, Community Health Planning and Promotion. 405, Environmental. 410, Special Clinical Services. 415, Adult Maternal Child Services. 425, Laboratory. 440 is Greenwich Emergency Medical Services. Brings us to Nathaniel Witherell. 450, Nathaniel Witherell. Moving to Social Services, 501, Administration. 502, Adult and Family Services. 509, Aging Homemaker Only Services. 510, Aging Casework and Economic Support. We are now at the schools, and here, if there is any motion addressed to the Class 1 operations, Class 1 expenditures, it must be made to the administration account. Dr. Carlson, District 1, on 600 Board of Ed Administration.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, I move we reduce line 600 BOE Administration by $100,000.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to reduce Code 600, Board of Education Administration, by $100,000, and that is now before us. Dr. Carlson?
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, it has been my hope for many years that the RTM could make a contribution in trying to bring down the rich level of spending in schools, which I think is excessive. This is a simple attempt, which may not succeed, to try to do this. Thank you.
Discussion on the motion to reduce the school's budget by $100,000. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Carlson, motion to reduce Code 600, BOE Administration, by $100,000 and proceed to poll your delegation. Are there any additional motions addressed to the school's budget? All right, this is one. Again, after we tally the results of the vote, if we need to come back, we will do that. That now brings us over to page 8, the libraries. 701, Greenwich Library. 702, Peterson Wing. 710, Perrott Library. Parks and Recreation, 801 Administration, 811 Recreation Supervision, 812 Organized Recreation, 813 Greats Senior Center, 814 Eastern Civic Center, 815 Community Centers, 816 Skating Rink, 817 Western Civic Center, 821 Parks and Trees Administration, 822 Parks and Playgrounds and Fields, 823 Ball Field Maintenance, 825 Equipment Maintenance, 829 Trees, 831 Marine Supervision, 832 Marine Maintenance, 833 Marine Beaches, 834 Harbors and Boating Facilities. That brings us to the fixed charges. 901 Employee Benefits. Joan Caldwell, Chair of District 10.
Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting. Normally when we get to the fixed expenses, we just zip right through them because they are, in the most cases, what the name says, fixed. There's not much we can do about them tonight. There isn't an awful lot that we can do about them through the years because in many instances they represent insurance costs and Social Security and group life insurance, things of that sort. However, there is one item that I'd like to call your attention to this evening. It has been referred to by the chairman of the Finance Committee in her report to you, but it is so important that I rise to speak to the same subject myself. I would bring your attention to Code 901, Fixed Expenses Personnel, and in particular the detail that you need to see is in the big book on General Fund, page 144. The first line item is line 57010, and it refers to the contribution that the town makes to its retirement program. If you will look at it, the actual contribution in 04-05 was $660,000. It was budgeted for $668,000 in 05-06, and it's being budgeted this year, the budget we're about to act on, $3,992,000, or roughly a 480% increase. Now, I think that that might capture most people's attention, and it should. It's a big jump, but it's a jump that can be explained, and it has been explained. The jump is accounted for in three parts. The first part, I'm going to go over them quickly because tonight is not the night to delve into this in depth. We're going to do that in about a month. The first part is a smoothing out process, a process by which we look at the investment portfolio in the bad years and we compare it to the good years and we even it out and we make up the difference. We put more money into the pot if we need to. The second component part is that you and I together, this past summer and spring, moved this town from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan for 2 units of employees, GMEA and the Teamsters. We knew that there would be an expense to this. The expense was going to be an annual COLA given to present employees in those 2 groups every year when they retire. We have to begin to fund it. We have to begin putting money aside. And so approximately $1,200,000 of this $3,900,000 is that putting aside. The third piece, the piece that I want you to really look at and think about, is the ad hoc pension increase that was granted to present retirees, not future retirees, those that are retired now, by the Retirement Board. It represents 100% of the CIP, which it averaged out to about a 3%. It was done to restore the buying power of the retirees' pension money. At least that's what the Retirement Board told us. It was their decision, by majority or unanimity. I'm not sure which. I believe unanimity. The Retirement Board, once it made its decision, then wrote a letter to the BET and recommended that the increase be given and that it was going to cost X number of dollars. Now, let's make no mistake about it. While the letter recommended, it was not a recommendation. It was a bill, because the BET is by law obligated, hear the word, obligated, to pay it. There's no discussion. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's the bill, boys. Pay it. And that was the ruling of a former town attorney in writing. The BET passes the bill to us. We've got it tonight. It was paid last July and has been paid each month successively, but we're seeing the money taken out of the account. We have to put it back in. And that accounts for roughly $1.4 million. It is for the RTM an obligation. I'd like to reduce it. I can't. I'm obligated to pay it. Hence, when you think about it, 5 people, 2 representing the town, 3 representing the employees, none of whom are elected, have the opportunity to tax, at least insofar as ad hoc pension increases are concerned. They can agree to something which the BET and the RTM must approve, no matter how we think of it or what we agree to. The retirement process that we have has been in place since 1945. It's a good process. It's worked well for us. But we began tweaking with the plan in the 80s and the late 90s and so on. And once we started tweaking with it, then I think we got out of step. Then I think the process really didn't serve us, or doesn't serve us as well. Now, you created a special committee of the RTM to look into this, to really delve into it. And that committee has met for almost a year with members of the Retirement Board, past and present, with all sorts of town officials. We've read records and minutes and all sorts of things. And we have finally finished our work, written a report, and submitted it to you. It came in the call this month. This is what it looks like. If you haven't read it, pull it out, read it, go over it. In June, there will be a resolution on the call that you can vote up or down with regard to this item. There will also be an opportunity for you to meet with the committee, the special committee, during the regular sessions in preceding the RTM. Finally, I would like to say that no one would deny anything to a past or present employee, but the process here needs to be fixed.
Thank you. I have the results of the vote on the Town Services Committee motion to reduce the Code 201 Fire Administration by $50,000. Those in favor, 169, opposed, 14, abstaining, 0. That motion has carried. So the total of 201 has now been reduced to $1,171,641. I also have the result of the vote on the Carlson motion to reduce the school's budget by $100,000. Those in favor, 27, opposed, 155, abstaining, 0. That motion has failed. Is there any need to return to either of those accounts? Hearing none, we'll pick up where we left off. We were at the fixed charges. This is on page designated RTM 10. 901, employee benefits. 902, unemployment and workers' compensation. 908, insurance. 911, taxes for town properties. 925, contribution to capital reserve. 926, non-public school costs. 950, repayment of debt principal. Now, this next account, 999, transfer to other funds. The total amount is $66,617,000. This includes the monies for the capital projects, which we are about to go into now. So, I am not. We're not avoiding the capital projects. We will go through them code by code. So 999, transfer to other funds. All right, that brings us to the capital projects, beginning on RTM 12. 134, Information Technology Department. 205, Firefighting Force. 206, Banksville Fire. 209, Round Hill Fire. 213, Police General Services. 302, DPW Engineering. 312, DPW Highway, Streets, and Bridges. Mr. Dudakis, District 1.
Mr. Moderator, I move the deletion of $460,000 from account number 312-961-27022, Road and Sidewalk Maintenance, Mallard Drive Sidewalk.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to delete $460,000 from account 312-961-27022, the Mallard Drive Sidewalk. That is currently before us. Mr. Dudakis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Members of the RTM, shame on me. It wasn't until last week that I became aware that this was even in the budget. And Mr. Lash had always admonished me to read the budget carefully. You never know what you're voting on. But it doesn't matter whether I knew or not. What I found out over the weekend was that the town in no way notifies the property owners that there is going to be a sidewalk built on their street, and that the result of that is that you have a tremendous legal liability for that sidewalk once the town decides to put it in, not to mention you might lose a little bit of what you think is your yard. I spoke with Arlene Lamazzo, and she confirmed that to me and said, but people know about it. You know, the PTAs are aware about it, Julian Curtis, the high school, the neighbors talk amongst each others. And that may be absolutely correct, but I think when you're going to take a step to impose a legal liability like this on the residents of the town, we really need to take the extra step and notify them that this is going to happen. If someone in your neighborhood is going to the P&Z asking for a variance or a change, you're notified because of that. In this case, no one was notified. I don't know whether I'm for or against a sidewalk at this point. I just think that at this point the process needs to change a little bit. I do know there's been debate in the neighborhood about it. Some people are in favor of sidewalks, some are against. There's some calming, some traffic calming techniques that have been imposed. You have a traffic white line on either side of the road to kind of push traffic towards the middle, slowing it down. Also, the result of that was creating sort of a walkway for pedestrians, even though that wasn't the absolute intent. So I do ask that you delete this item tonight, allow you know, the neighbors to be made more aware of it. Those who want it, I think, are aware of it. And you know, perhaps this will come back in another version. But I think if this happened in your neighborhood, you'd probably object to it as well. So I ask you to support this item tonight. Thank you.
Did we get any committee reports on this, Mr. Dudakis?
Not to my knowledge. Nobody in our district talked about it.
All right, you didn't bring this to a committee?
I didn't see it Thursday.
Okay. Discussion on Mr. Dudakis's motion to delete. Arlene Lamazzo, District 6.
Members of the RTM, Mr. Moderator, guests, this item came to the Selectmen's Pedestrian Safety Committee, was referred to us by folks who live on Mallard Drive. Mallard Drive has three problems. It is a cut-through street. People turn left at that light in the vicinity of Greenwich High School in order to get over to Anderson Hill Road, in order not to have to go through central Greenwich. It's sort of their bypass to get quickly downtown to the highway, to I-95. It sees a tremendous amount of cut-through traffic. They move at high speeds. We went there in the spring of 2003. The entire committee stood there, walked there, observed. We didn't take an immediate action. We wanted to watch it, and we did. In the past year, when we did the sidewalk inventory, members of the community were invited to the committee to help us ascertain where there were problems in the neighborhood. And again, we had the principal of Julian Curtis attend that meeting, the head of the PTA Safety Committee from Julian Curtis, people from Wilbur Peck Court, whose children walk there in in one direction, and we contacted the PTA presidents at Greenwich High School and had representation there. The road is used by students going to Julian Curtis School and to Greenwich High School. Now, Mr. Didakis speaks about a white line, side striping. Side striping was never meant to be protection for pedestrians. Side striping tells you that the road ends there, so as a driver, you will know where your roadway is, especially in the dark. It is not meant to be protection for children. What we noticed on our inventory trip, and we spent a lot of time and we took pictures of the children walking, is that they walk on the side of the road with their backs to traffic. It's exceedingly dangerous. They do not walk facing the traffic, even though they may have been taught that. So you have a very dangerous road with cut-through traffic and children walking on it. You have mothers with carriages who begged us to put this in because they want to walk their children to Julian Curtis School. And it's difficult for them to even get to Anderson Hill Road where there is a sidewalk. You have a sidewalk to the south, you have a sidewalk to the north, and you have this gap. There is no need to suffer this gap for our children or for our adults. And yes, you do have to shovel your sidewalk, and yes, if somebody has a severe accident, which has not happened to my knowledge in all the years I've been doing this, I have not known of a situation where a homeowner has been sued. Sidewalks are generally in fairly good condition, especially the asphalt ones, which I assume this will be because it's a residential neighborhood. So I think the fear of liability is blown a little out of proportion. Everybody has homeowners insurance. If anything were to happen, you are covered by your homeowner's insurance. So I don't see that that's a problem. Mr. Didakis should know he sells insurance. Mr. Didakis is new.
Excuse me, Ms. Lamazo?
Sorry, I won't say that. Take it back. I'm not the expert on insurance, the gentleman is. If there's anybody here from Julian Curtis or the schools who wish to speak, I think it's their turn.
Ms. Lamazo?
Thank you.
Are you? Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the Didakis motion to delete? Yes. Ms. Brown?
Good evening. My name is Annie Brown, and I am the Safety Committee Chairman of Julian Curtis School. And I have here a letter from the principal, Nancy Carbone, from Julian Curtis that I'd like to read to the RTM members. It has come to my attention that the town of Greenwich has included the addition of a sidewalk along Mallard Drive in its capital improvements budget for 2007. I applaud this measure in improving the safety of the students and the parents of Julian Curtis as they walk to and from school. Of our 370 students, nearly 75% are within walking distance. Many of those who walk to school come from this direction. Mallard Drive is heavily used by commuters making their way to the heart of town at exactly the same hours that our walking families set out for school. Julian Curtis serves children from the ages of 4 through 11. Parents usually accompany these children to school, and often with younger siblings. Negotiating this road by foot is indeed challenging. And my aside would be, try it. Although the speed limit is 25, the width of the road and the long sight distance lends itself to faster speeds, which are commonly observed. Mallard Drive is known to the police department for excessive speeds, and it has set up its mobile speed detector on this road numerous times. In May of 2000, a survey was conducted by the Julian Curtis School Safety Committee, with 63% of the families responding, an impressive return. Obviously, child safety is a primary concern in our community. Safety issues were cited as one of the main reasons for not walking to school. Lack of sidewalks and speeding were among the top complaints, with Mallard Drive at the head of the list. The suggestions to add sidewalks to Mallard Drive was also made in a survey done by the Selectmen's Pedestrian Safety Committee. Last year, as a stopgap measure, the road was striped on both sides to allow room for walking and biking. Although the situation has improved, both speeding and pedestrians walking on the roadway still persist. Adding a sidewalk with curbing will afford our walking school community an advanced measure of protection. We must ensure our students and parents safe passage to school. I completely support the addition of the sidewalk for the safety of the families in Julian Curtis School. Truly yours, Nancy C. Carbone, Principal.
I neglected to remind our speakers there is a 3-minute limit in effect, so there's 1 minute remaining.
Okay, then I will just say that I have contacted several families from Mallard Drive, and they've sent me emails that I could certainly pass off to you if you would like to read them later. But, you know, in general, I just wanted to let you know that this is not a brand new thing. This has been going on for more than 10 years. The survey that we conducted was in 2000, which was 6 years ago. So it should not be a surprise to anyone, unless they're new on that road, that the sidewalk's been in discussion for a while.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to delete Mr. Clark, District 7.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, I certainly agree that Mallard Drive is probably one of the most dangerous streets in town. I'm one of those who tends to think that the speed limits are put there for a reason, and I mostly obey them, I think. But about a month ago, I was driving down Mallard Drive, and somebody behind me thought that 25 was just not fast enough. And they came right across the yellow line, sped by me at least 45 or 50 miles an hour. A sidewalk will help, but I think the problems on Mallard Drive and other streets in town are more serious than that. $400,000 is a lot of money. I'd like to see it go perhaps in other directions, like much more enforcement. Stanwich Road is another road where I've been passed, you know, with this double yellow line. The speed limit is 25 or 30. People want to go 50 or 60. We need to do something, I think, about the lack of law enforcement on some of these roads. I'm of two minds about this. I'd rather delete the $400,000 for a sidewalk and put it into police enforcement on both Mallard and other streets similarly affected in town. I just want to point that out to this meeting. Thank you.
Is there a Mr. Aludo who would like to speak? Mr. Aludo, to be followed by Sheldon Pang. And our following speaker is welcome to sit in one of the seats up front.
I appreciate the opportunity. I live on Pintail Lane. I have 3 children, 4th which is due in about another day, and my daughter walks to school on Mallard every day, and I am concerned for her safety. And my other 2 children will be going to Julian Curtis as well, so when I was given the opportunity to come here tonight, and I've never done this before, I thought it was important. My wife would be here, but obviously with the baby due in a day, she couldn't, so and she's the attorney of the family. She'd probably do a better job than I will do here tonight. But we teach our daughter to walk with her back to the traffic because of the blind spots that exist on Mallard. Any of you that have been down there and you've seen the children, it is a street that needs sidewalks. There are other children in the neighborhood that go to Julian Curtis. There are other children that go to Greenwich High School. And as a father of 3, soon to be 4, I would urge everyone to support the measure to have sidewalks on Mallard Drive.
Thank you. Mr. Pang, to be followed by Jim O'Brien, District 8.
Hi, my name is Sheldon Pan. My wife and I and our 3 children
have been living on Mallard Drive over 10 years. 3 children at school age. One of them attends Julian Curtis. The other one will be this fall. And the eldest one had been to Greenwich High School. About exactly 2 years ago, a group of us among the neighbors had discussions on traffic calming measures that's needed for Mallard Drive. I agree with all of the speakers on this subject tonight in that Mallard Drive has had track problem that needs to be dealt with. What happened was 2 years ago, in addition to the meetings that Arlene mentioned, there have been extensive discussions among the neighbors, and I here would like to briefly summarize the various proposals that have been brought up, and in our discussions with the town hall at the time. That includes install stop signs and speed bumps. I think at the time it was rejected by the town, saying that we don't usually do it for public roads, and there was too much braking and traffic noise for speed bumps. And the other thing, as Arlene mentioned, we talked about removing the left turn signal on East Putnam Avenue, turning to Overlook Drive. And the response we got from town that was, that's a state road under state jurisdiction. And the third idea was placing partial roadblocks like in Millbrook, and then we were told, well, that's not for public roads. Now, there are 2 other ideas that have been controversial among the residents. Basically, what we did was we wrote a letter, and I delivered to every household on Mallard Drive. Then we've been knocking on every household door to collect people's response. So some we got in written forms. I have the file here, and others verbal, but I'll summarize them to you. The ideas that were, that were controversial were, number 1, separating Mallard Drive into 2 dead ends, with residents of the south sector using Anderson and those of the north sector using Overlook. And the town said, well, that's not likely. And some of the residents said, well, that's too inconvenient. And the second idea was to install sidewalk. And at the time, we were told it could cost a lot of money and may take up to 10 years.
1 minute, please.
Okay. And the residents that were opposing to the idea is basically saying, one is, as Ed says, is most residents were concerned about legal liabilities, and a number of senior residents on the street, they will go vacation in the winter out of town, and for them to be left with that potential liability on the sidewalk was a big concern. And the cutting to the front yards and sort of property value, that's another thing. So basically, we proposed 3 ideas to the town, and one is to draw a white, the strip on the street. We're glad that has been done, and we think that has been had a positive impact both on because there's a designated area for pedestrians to walk, although it's not, and then also in terms of narrowing the lane to slow down the traffic. And these 3 ideas were non-controversial. Basically, every neighbors we talked to supported the idea. And the second is to use sort of chokes or chicanes. Basically, these are separated, like elevated semicircular areas that will go in from both sides of the street to narrow lane to slow down traffic.
Thank you.
And that at the time was, Arlene said, was a $10,000 item, which we thought was a good idea to do, as opposed to a $400,000. So that's another idea we'd really like to do. And the third is to establish crosswalks connecting the chokes with yield to pedestrian signs. So basically, I just want to quickly summarize the response we got from the people who said we would like to they support these ideas. That includes Mr. and Mrs. Carter Grassi of 85 Mallard Drive, Mary and Paul Smith of 92 Mallard Drive. Mary's here. Roseanne and Mark
Mr. Laurie, you moved to extend the time
and
for
John,
the speaker. So
basically, there are 6 residents here. There are total about 25 households. So in other words, we basically would like to have the idea of having the chokes or crosswalks as opposed to more controversial sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien, you had a question? Is that a rhetorical question, Mr. O'Brien? Thank you. All right, the question was the liability if a child is hit if we don't put a sidewalk in. Mary Smith?
Good evening. My name is Mary Smith. I live on Mallard Drive. I have lived there, we have lived there since 1999. I have 3 daughters. They are now aged 11, 8 and 7. And we have been walking on Mallard Drive for the last 7 years, and I am thankful that we are all still alive. It is a very, very dangerous road. It needs a sidewalk. My daughter is now at Central Middle School. Every morning she walks to Pintail Lane to get the bus. And again, I worry about her as she leaves. She stays in as close as possible. But without a sidewalk, I don't know if it's safe. We have the white line, which we were all very pleased about. But unfortunately, cars can go over the white line very easily. If there's a sidewalk with a curb, it protects everybody. Every day, approximately 150 students from 3 schools use Mallard Drive: Julian Curtis Central Middle School and the high school. It's also used by people jogging, walking with strollers and on bicycles. There's a lot of older people who live on our street who also we have to think about, as well as the younger children. I won't delay, but I think it's very, very important that Mallard Drive gets a sidewalk. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the Dudakis motion to delete $460,000 for a sidewalk on Mallard Drive? Yes, sir.
I'm Lance Porgo from 35 Mallard Drive, and I've been part of many of the discussions. I'm new to Mallard Drive. I've been there for about 3 years, so I am one of those people that are newer to the area, but was duly noted about what was going on, has attended several of the meetings. I feel like that we were, back to the original point of order, we were duly notified of this. There's been a tremendous amount of conversation about it. There's also been two sides. I mean, Mr. Pang has talked about an alternative that was not unanimous on the side of the residents of the neighborhood to actually be interested in something such as a choke point. The most important thing for us is the sidewalk. It's to be able to allow 2 things: obviously the safe crossing of kids both directions, and I live right in the middle of the street, which is probably the best vantage point to just sit there and watch cars hit about 50 miles per hour right at that middle point. You also see quite a bit of large trucks. Just this week, I had a place to call into the police department for a Standard Oil truck hitting about 50 miles per hour in a big oil tanker as children are walking past. It's tremendously frightening. I think the use of it as a pass-through has not changed. In fact, it's just people find out more and more about it. When I saw the oil tanker going through this week, it sent shivers down my spine just knowing that those things are happening. That is becoming now also a commercial route as well. So basically, I just want to reiterate that I think the last study that was done, there's 13,000 cars that are going down there on a given week, and I want to reinforce that if you do a sidewalk, you have what's probably most important, which is a visual deterrent. The line that's going on, that's going down the street right now, there's no visual deterrent. It's very easy, and I watch the cars go right over it and completely ignore it. It really isn't doing anything. But that visual deterrent of the side of the curb, while yes, you could go over it, but there's a deterrent that you're not going to want to hit that curb because you're going to do damage to your own car. And of course, that visual deterrent will protect our children, which I have got 2 and also 1 on the way. So I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to delete?
Good evening. I'm Mary Pellegrino. I live on Millbank Avenue. Now, I agree that sidewalks could present a safe look. However, I think the police should be there to monitor the speeders, because they did it one time and we didn't have this many problems. On Millbank Avenue, we have a sidewalk on each side. I hate to tell you how fast they travel down that street. So it's not going to stop the rushing traffic if you don't have some patrol. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to delete? to be followed by Mr. Boutel. We have a speaker coming up from District 1.
I'm Mary Ambrosia from District 1, and I live a block below Julian Curtis School, in the vicinity where all the building is taking place. I have seen right on East Elm Street, at the entrance to Quarry Knoll, they had built 2 or 3 condos there. With all of the building equipment and the trucks, there were sidewalks right in front of them, and the children walked in the street going to Julian Curtis School. There was no protection for them with a sidewalk, and I don't see how a sidewalk on Mallard Drive is going to afford them any more protection than they have presently. Thank you.
Mr. Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, I'm sorry I couldn't resist, but I have to say this is one of the most dangerous roads in town, particularly on an evening when Mr. Dodakis has one of his parties. I can attest to that. I think members of our Board of Selectmen can attest to that. Our town clerk can attest to that.
Right, Mr.
But he
Boutel,
makes,
I think we'll refrain from any personal comments here.
Mr. Dodakis, in his speech, made one good point, and that is simply that the advocates for the program tonight talked about their going out and notifying neighbors. We heard from the school principal. Obviously, it can be easy to round up your supporters, but I would like to see and have a commitment from the town that when we do have proposed sidewalks going in front of somebody's home, since it's the town that's going to be doing the construction, that every homeowner receive legal notice. As I understand Mr. Dodakis' point, he's saying he received no legal notice, and I think that that should be a position that the town takes. When we are doing construction in front of your home, you should receive legal notice.
Mr. Laurie, District 7. The motion for the previous question has been moved and seconded. That motion is a motion to cut off debate. It is not itself debatable, and it requires a 2/3 majority to pass. If you are in favor of immediately proceeding to vote on Mr. Dodakis' motion to delete this item, you should vote in favor of the Laurie motion for the previous question. If you would like to give others the opportunity to discuss this further, you should vote no. All those in favor of the motion for the previous question, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion has carried. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Dodakis motion to delete code 312-961-27022. And we are deleting the entire $460,000. While we are voting on that, we will continue going through our budget. We are currently on RTM page 12 in the code 312 DPW Highway, Streets, and Bridges. Are there any further motions addressed to that code? Okay. Continuing on, code 321 DPW Waste Disposal, 345 DPW Building Construction and Maintenance. All right. Let's conduct the voting as quickly and quietly as possible because we continue to conduct the business of the meeting. Randall Huffman, District 7.
Mr. Moderator, I would urge that we have a separate vote on item 956-27039, the public safety appropriation for $33 million.
What is your motion?
I move that we have a separate vote on that appropriation.
Are you moving to delete it?
If that's the only way that I can get a separate vote, I would just urge that we have a separate vote on the item.
All right. It is part of our budget resolution. So if you want to amend it, We will have a vote on it as part of the entire budget.
I understand.
Okay, so what is your motion?
If the only way it can be separately voted on is by a motion to delete, I move that we delete the entire appropriation of $33 million.
All right. Before I accept it, Mr. Fox, could I just have a moment? All right. It has been moved and seconded to delete $33 million, the entire amount. This is on page RTM 13 under Code 345, DPW Building Construction and Maintenance. In particular, 345-956-27039. This is the public safety facility. Total appropriation of $33 million. Discussion, that is now before us. Discussion on the motion to delete. Mr. Huffman.
Most of you are familiar with the title of this item, the public safety facility. It's been discussed at various times over a period of time, and yet we have yet to have, with regard to this, the most significant public works project in the town, in this budget, or for some number of years, a separate record vote on the project going forward. Therefore, I urge that we have a record vote, at which time members of the RTM will have an opportunity to voice and record their approval or disapproval of this project as it currently has been proposed. I would urge you, in considering your vote, to take into account whether you have been convinced that this is the right building, in the right place, at the right time, at the right price. If you are convinced that those are the case, then you should vote for this appropriation as long as you are satisfied that this amount properly reflects what you expect the public safety complex, police parking, and police administration facility to cost. If you have questions about that, I think you should consider what the future appropriations may need to be. If you have questions remaining with regard to any of these items, I suggest that you should at this time not vote to approve this appropriation. I think it is in all our interests that there be on record a clear decision with regard to this public safety complex. Thank you.
Further discussion on the Huffman motion to delete $33 million. Chief Walters, Chief of Police of the Town of Greenwich.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, I'll be brief. We've been through this a number of times already. I disagree with Mr. Huffman that the RTM has not had the opportunity to vote and make its feelings known. I stood here last year before you speaking into the same question when a motion was made to delete the funds to begin the project last year. The condition of the building has simply gotten worse. At this point, we're 95% out of it and moved into the fire police building. The fire department is down on Holly Hill Lane. The roadway has been torn up. The piping and utilities have already been started to be moved, and the project is moving forward. The only thing that's going to be accomplished by delaying this is increasing the cost as inflation takes hold. So I urge you all to vote in favor of the $33 million, leaving it in the budget this year and defeating the motion that was just put before you. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to delete $33 million. Jim Lash, our first selectman.
Let me just take a couple of minutes and rehearse the history here. We've been discussing creating a new police headquarters for, let's say, since the late 1990s when then First Selectman Tom Ragland was trying to acquire an existing building over by Exit 4. But indeed, the need for a police headquarters building predates that probably by 1 or 2 decades. During the Prince administration in 2000, 2001, 2002, there was a committee that included over 20 representatives of the town, including many members of the town meeting. They looked at numerous sites around the town and recommended, in the end, the site that we now have as their second choice. In the Bergstresser administration, we again looked at another site a couple of blocks away from this one, and we had architectural drawings developed for a building on this site. At the same time, we had a consulting study done by an outside expert that does, as one of its primary pieces of work, design public safety buildings in Connecticut and around the country. They produced functional specifications. They indicated the amount of square footage we would need. They answered the question, how large should the building be? What functions should it have? How much space do we have to provide for growth? In the last couple of years, we've had an architect develop a detailed design. We've had that design reviewed by a committee, including the chiefs of the public safety facilities, the public safety departments, Charlie Tufts on behalf of GEMS, again, representatives of the town meeting, representatives of planning and zoning. Those meetings have been held with the neighbors in attendance at those meetings, so they would have an opportunity to review the designs. And we had an outside project management firm look at the project and do value engineering to be certain that we were building the building in a cost-efficient way. We've had cost estimates developed on 4 separate occasions by 2 different firms. And we have a cost estimate now for the part on which we're voting tonight, which, remember, is the new police headquarters building and the adjacent parking structure. Those cost estimates have been developed and refined, and value engineering has taken things out of the project and put things in, including the latest requirements for things like blast security. The project is not very different, interestingly enough, from the police buildings that were built in other Connecticut towns in the last 5 years. And the cost per square foot and the total cost is very similar when you adjust for population differences. In addition, the cost per square foot for this building looks very much like the cost per square foot in the bids that we just received for the Hamilton Avenue School. So we have lots of reasons to believe that these cost estimates are pretty accurate, and because of the earlier work, we believe we have the right spaces, and we believe, to address another question that was raised, that this is in fact the best place to have this building, because we want this building to be adjacent to what will eventually be the renovated fire headquarters. So I think in the, let's say, 8 years we've been looking hard at this question, we have at one time or another addressed all the kinds of questions that were raised here a few minutes ago. We can't know everything. But as the police chief said a second ago, this project is now well underway using the money that you appropriated last year to move the fire administration out, to move the police department fully into the fire building, and to relocate the public utilities in the streets. It's time to do this project. Construction inflation rates are reported to be double-digit. Every year we postpone this project, we'll raise the cost of it by, depending on how you want to think about it, $2, $3, $4 million. We have here a parking garage project that's going to cost about $4 to $5 million. We have site remediation costs of $1 million to $1.5 million, and the remainder to build the police headquarters building. It's the right project. It's in the right place. It's been studied very carefully. It's the right time to do it, and I urge you to vote for the project and reject this, this motion to delete. Thank you very much.
Further discussion on the Huffman motion to delete $33 million. Mr. Boutel.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, when Mr. Huffman made his motion, he stated that we have never had the chance to vote on this. That's incorrect. I'm the one that stood before you a year ago and proposed cutting the money for this project out of last year's budget. Only 24 of you voted to support that motion a year ago. I will say, since that time, I have attended numerous meetings, an outstanding presentation that was done by the First Selectman on this new building, on the new police building, the new parking structure. The one thing I would like to hear tonight, we've been told that this is going to happen in phases. If you look at your capital plan, I believe it's an additional $30 million when it comes time 2 cycles from now. We have the police building, the parking structure done, then we have an off year where there's about $2 million, $2.5 million, then you have another $30 million chunk. Now, we were told a year ago, when I made my motion, this doesn't commit you to anything. It does, but my district leader makes the point, there were those who advocated putting the police station somewhere else, selling this piece of property off. The work that was done with last year's money would have needed to have been done anyway. My question, and as I'm concerned, and we'll get into later with the borrowing and getting out to $52 million 5 years from now, what happens if we run into economic trouble 4 years down the road? We have completed the police administration building. We then start to move to the fire phase. Can this project stand on its own? That is my question to the appropriate town official. If we vote this money and we vote for the parking structure, which is taking into account use by police vehicles and fire vehicles and GEMS vehicles, if we vote this money tonight for those 2 buildings, does indeed that commit us to the additional 30 2 cycles out for the fire building? That's a separate argument about the need for it. My question is, could these 2 structures stand on their own?
Mr. Lash? The answer is yes, from Mr. Lash. Further discussion on the Huffman motion to delete $33 million. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Huffman motion to delete code $33 million from code 345-956-27039, public safety facility. I do have the results of the vote on the Didakis motion to delete $460,000 for the Mallard Drive sidewalk. Those in favor, 42. Opposed, 139. Abstaining, 3. That motion has failed. All right. While we are voting on the Huffman motion, we will continue, so please conduct the voting quickly and quietly. Are there any further motions addressed to Code 345, DPW Building Construction and Maintenance? Moving on, we are on page RTM 13. 351, DPW Building Inspection. 402, Health, Community Health. 450, Nathaniel Witherell. 502, Social Service, Adult and Family Services. 680, Board of Education. 701, Greenwich Library. 710, Perrott Memorial Library. 816, Parks and Recreation, Ice Skating Rink. 822, Parks and Rec, Parks, Playgrounds, and Fields. 823, Parks and Rec, Ball Field Maintenance. 832, Parks and Rec, Marine Maintenance. 833, Parks and Rec, Beaches. And 834, Parks and Rec, Harbor and Boating Facilities. Brings us to RTM page 15, Sewer Maintenance Fund. 361 DPW Sewer Maintenance. 361 Sewer Improvement. School Lunch Fund. 670 School Lunch Fund. Into the Parking Fund. 219 Parking Services. 318 DPW Highway Traffic Engineering. 317 DPW Highway Parking. By the way, in 317 I am told that the total amount should be $345. It should be reduced by $100. So, Mr. Tessie, is that correct? All right. So apparently there is a typo somewhere. So, Mr. Laurie, you moved to reduce by $100. All right. It has been moved and seconded to reduce Code 317 by $100. Discussion on? All right. We do need to take a record vote. Well, actually, we could do this by unanimous consent. Is there any objection to reducing this by $100? Hearing none, that motion is adopted upon unanimous consent. All right, that brings us to page 19, RTM 19, the Golf Course Revolving Fund. 824 Harris Golf Course. And the last page is Code 131, Other Post-Employment Benefits. Okay. Do we have the results of that vote yet? No. Okay. If we need to return to the appropriations, we will do so. But for the moment, we will now proceed to the language of the budget resolution. The way this resolution works, any deletions or reductions that we make tonight are entered in that first resolved clause where it says, now therefore be it resolved. There is a space for any decreases that we make tonight. Now we are addressing the resolved clauses below that. Let's begin with our Legislative and Rules Committee. Doug Wells, its chair.
Mr. Moderator, our committee reviewed the resolutions last Monday evening, and the first motion I would make would be addressing the body's attention to page 2, the fourth full paragraph, the first one in boldface, the further resolve that the Department of Parks and Recreation, that entire resolution was voted to be deleted by our committee by a vote of 10-0-0 with District 3 and 9 absent.
All right. Do you have a substitute to put in place?
I do have a substitute, but procedurally it's going to be made by me individually because a resolution came to me from Mr. Gomo and Mr. Fox, and after reading it, I said that I would be willing to offer that individually, but not part of my committee because it came to me after our committee vote.
Okay. So you are now moving on behalf of your committee to delete the paragraph. This is the fourth full paragraph on the page designated Resolutions 2. I believe it appears in our call on page 4. This year, you may have noticed, we did try and make the call identical to this resolution in the budget book, but we are working from the one in the budget book. So that is now before us. It does not require a second. Mr. Wells.
We spent a good deal of time attempting to read and reread this resolution in our committee, and we finally concluded that it was written in a language with which we were not familiar. It's impossible to understand the purpose of the resolution, and we spent some considerable time trying to redraft it in a way to convey what was attempted, and we understood from Attorney Fox that what was attempted here was to ensure that when the Parks and Rec opens a building to a basketball league and a custodian comes out, and rather than getting paid directly by the people in the league, the league would be billed for the custodian's time, and then the custodian would be paid through the town. It would be additional W-2 income so that we wouldn't have a situation like we had in the Board of Ed, and this was a resolution that was attempting to do that. However, it didn't do a very effective job, so we moved to delete it. And at the appropriate time, I would offer a substitute resolution individually.
Could you just inform the body what that substitute would do? I think it does bear on deleting this, to make sure there's something in place.
The resolution that came to me by way of the Law Department is as follows, and this would be the substitute resolution in the event that you chose to delete what is in the book. Further resolved that the Department of Parks and Recreation be authorized to accept receipts resulting from the rental of town facilities. These receipts to become appropriations that the comptroller may add to the appropriate accounts for the purpose of reimbursing the approved costs related to the rental of town facilities, such costs not to exceed receipts in any fiscal year, semicolon, and.
All right, and that's similar language that we have for the Board of Education.
That's right.
Okay. Further discussion on the Legislative and Rules Committee motion to delete that resolution language. All right. If there is no objection, we can adopt this upon unanimous consent. Is there any objection to the deletion of that resolution? Hearing none, that motion to delete is adopted upon unanimous consent. Mr. Wells?
The next motion to delete refers to the whereas clause that begins at the bottom of page 2 of your book, which is the bonding clause, which begins, whereas the Board of Estimate and Taxation.
Yeah, why don't, I was thinking the same thing. I know it's not on behalf of your committee, but I think it would make sense now just to
No, this one is on behalf of...
No, I'm saying that replacement for what we just deleted. Why don't we take care of that now before you move on?
All right. I would move to replace... Thank you.
All right. Do we need to... It has been moved and seconded to amend our budget resolution by adopting the language that Mr. Wells has previously read to us. Is there a need to reread that language? All right. Is there any objection to the adoption of that language? All right. So the motion to amend by adding the language that Mr. Wells has suggested is adopted upon unanimous consent. Thank you.
The next deletion is with respect to the bonding resolution, which appears in the book twice, with the exception of in the whereas clause on page 2, it says, whereas the Board of Estimate and Taxation has approved specific appropriations. If you go to the bold-faced resolution on page 7, The only difference between that resolution and the resolution that begins at the bottom of page 7 is the language which states, whereas the representative town meeting has approved specific appropriations. The rest of it is exactly the same. So therefore, our committee voted 10-0-0 to delete the entirety of the resolution that begins with the whereas clause on page 2 and ends with section 5 on page 3, which ends with a line, capital projects financed by such bonds or other obligations.
Thank you. Again, that being offered on behalf of our committee does not require a second. That motion to delete is now before us. Is there any objection to deleting that duplicate language? Hearing none, that motion to delete may be adopted upon unanimous consent. Mr. Wells, let me just interrupt you for a moment. I want to report the vote on Mr. Huffman's motion to delete the $33 million. Those in favor, 37, opposed, 143, abstaining 4. That motion has failed. Mr. Wells?
In order to incorporate the resolution for bonding that begins on page 7 in accordance with the rest of the budget resolutions, and believing that the whereas clause is not necessary because there are whereas clauses that address all the requirements at the beginning of the budget resolutions, we voted 10-0-0 to, first of all, at the end of the paragraph preceding the whereas clause, to insert a semicolon after the words health care costs and inserting the word and then deleting the whereas clause that follows, and then deleting the following words in the part that's underlined. B, and it is hereby resolved by the representative town meeting, and inserting in its place further resolved, so that it reads further resolved as follows, and then the balance of the resolution is as it appears.
Okay. That motion to amend is now currently before us, a stylistic change to bring this in compliance with the other resolve clauses. Is there any objection to deleting the language and replacing it as described? Hearing none, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent.
There are two Scrivener's errors that I would like to suggest that we change. The first one is back on page 2. The second bold-faced resolution, which concerns the Connecticut Department of Transportation, there is reference to a statute section. We move to, at the end of the phrase 13B-38BB, to delete the period, insert a comma, delete the capital A, and insert in its place lowercase a, and then in the next line, the first word, delete the word hereby, so that it reads 38BB, comma, and to authorize.
Those two B's are in there?
Yeah, they stay.
Okay. That is a motion on behalf of our committee, does not require a second. Is there any objection to that change? Mr. Clark.
I don't recall that. I recall it as being a comma.
Okay. Do you have any objection to the comma, Mr. Clark? Hearing none, that change may be adopted upon unanimous consent.
And finally, I promise finally, on page 4, the fifth full paragraph relating to the police department resolutions, the last line where it says, in the preceding 6 months, we did indeed insert a semicolon there, so that between the months and the word and is inserted a semicolon.
All right, any objection to that? Hearing none, that may be adopted upon unanimous consent. Thank you. Mr. Brady, on behalf of the Education Committee.
The ninth whereas on page 5 is a resolution authorizing acceptance of up to $1.2 million gift from the Greenwich Sports Foundation. Mr. Kroll pointed out that half of this has already been received. This is a carryover resolution that was just transferred in whole from last year's budget. And to make the resolution conform with the capital budget, which reflects a $537,000 gift, suggested this be reduced to $600,000. The committee voted 11-0-0 to so recommend. And so the resolution would be to strike $1.2 million in the resolution and replace it with $600,000.
All right, that motion to amend is now currently before us. Any objection to changing the number from 1.2 million to 600,000? Hearing none, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent. Are there further motions to be addressed to these budget resolutions? Mary Ferry, District 5.
Sorry, I realized that I had marked one on page 7 right in the middle, and I would ask council, or ask through you, Mr. Mobley, further resolve that the following general conditions and the special conditions attached to the specific appropriations and designated by a schedule of conditions are hereby approved. And it says by this board, and I believe that should be by the representative town meeting.
Well, we'll ask. Mr. Fox, do you see the... Okay. Mr. Fox concurs that you are correct.
Then I make that motion.
All right. It has been moved and seconded to amend the resolution appearing on page designated resolutions 7. This is in the 5th full resolved clause to change in the second line the words "this board" to the RTM. So it would read, "are hereby approved by the RTM." Is there any objection to that change? Hearing none, that motion to amend may be adopted upon unanimous consent. Further, motions addressed to the budget resolution language. Mr. Huffman, District 7.
I move the deletion of the materials from the resolution beginning on page 7, the bold at the bottom, whereas the representative town meeting has approved, following from there through two-thirds down the next page, section 5.
All right.
This is the bonding provision.
All right. We have already deleted the whereas clause, but you are proposing we delete the rest of the authorization to bond.
Yes.
That appears on page 7 and 8 in bold. Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to delete the resolution authorizing the bonding of $2.5 million in the coming fiscal year, which resolution appears on pages 7 and 8 of our budget resolution. Discussion on that motion to delete. Mr. Huffman.
There's been a lot of discussion already on the subject. I'll try to be very brief. But we shouldn't make too short a point of the significant step that's proposed to be taken here. Contrary to the procedures followed by this town for many years before I moved here, this would call for general obligation borrowing from the public to pay for a capital project to be paid for itself in 5 equal installments. My concerns with regard to this amount are, first of all, that by the very numbers we have in front of us, this amount of borrowing is not necessary for this year. if we should spend so much more than has been contemplated on capital projects during the year, it could then be brought before us and dealt with at that time if we did not have sufficient cash to pay for the commitments that we had made. So it is not necessary at this time. Second, it establishes a precedent to borrow as a part of a program that will exceed well over $100 million by the present calculations. That's before other projects come, costs increase, and other proposals to add to the debt are made. At these levels, short-term debt, which might be appropriate in a small amount, become an unsound and potentially hazardous fiscal practice. I therefore view, again, that we should have a record vote on the specific proposal to do general obligation borrowing at this time for capital projects. That may seem strange to some people who know that I've spent much of my career helping people issue municipal debt for states, for cities, towns, counties, authorities, agencies, and we've funded public facilities. We funded facilities for schools, colleges, housing, sewer and water, any number of public facilities. But in those cases, the indebtedness made possible facilities that otherwise wouldn't have happened, and in most instances were designed to be self-liquidating, except in those cases of specifically public facilities such as town hall or a public building or an elementary school. In those instances, the practice universally is to establish the debt over a reasonable period of time for the period that the facilities will be in use and be enjoyed. That's sound fiscal planning, that's appropriate payment by the appropriate people, and that's a far wiser course if we are to embark upon a $100 million borrowing program, in my estimation. Thank you.
Further discussion on the Huffman motion to delete the bonding authorization? Dr. Carlson, District 1.
Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM, I salute and support Mr. Huffman on his motion tonight. I think a good deal of courage was needed to make it, and I think it is fundamentally good for the town. One of the great strengths of this town is to have no debt. The best thing we can do is to accept Mr. Huffman's motion and tax people if necessary for the money, but we're better off with no debt.
Peter Tessie, Chair of the BET.
The proposal before you tonight, we believe, is a responsible one. Should you choose not to exercise the borrowing this year, in a sense you're making a statement about next year, because in order to accomplish the projects that have been identified through a organized process, we have provided a clear mechanism to pay for them while keeping your taxes within a reasonable rate. And so if you delete this, the message to us on the BET will be very clear, is that next year you're not interested in this, and therefore projects won't get done, because it is highly unlikely the BET will look to exceed the mill rate guideline that has been in effect for the last 6 years. So again, you need to think about that when you act upon this evening. If you believe in bringing our infrastructure up to an acceptable standard, if you believe in moderate increases in the mill rate, then support this program, because we believe that it is in keeping with pay-as-you-go in terms of short-term, manageable, and something that you're comfortable with given the time span. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to delete the bonding authorization. Larry Simon of the BET, to be followed by Mr. Von Keyserling.
I would also urge you to support the bonding. To be fiscally responsible, I should say it the other way, to be fiscally irresponsible would be to borrow and increase your ongoing recurring costs, such as increasing personnel, increasing benefits. But we on the BET have worked very hard over the last 5 years to take as much money as possible from the operating costs, from the fixed charges, from the increase in revenue, and put it into the capital project, because one of the cornerstones, there are two cornerstones of this budget. One is to fix the infrastructure of the town, which, as you've heard before, has been long neglected. Two is to control the operating costs of the town, control the fixed charges, and put as much money into the capital as possible. We're not committing ourselves to an ongoing series of projects beyond this year. If we want to do the projects that are in the budget next year, we have a plan that says we will borrow this year a little money and a little more money next year, but we're not committing to doing that. And the money that we're asking for is to make sure that we have an adequate reserve in our capital non-recurring. We have $65 million of new projects this year, close to $55 million of projects that are from previous years. That's $110 million, maybe $120 million, and we need more than $1.5 million of contingency. And as Pam Frederick said, if the money's not used that we would have in the contingency, it's earning 5% interest in our interest accounts and will help us in the future. So I urge you to support the borrowing as a fiscally responsible way to continue maintaining our infrastructure. Thank you.
Mr. Von Keyserling, to be followed by Christine Edwards, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, guests. The question before us tonight is neither right or wrong. Our BET has been charged with figuring out a way to deal with the financial needs of the town. In this case, a bonded debt that we've already incurred in an unusual way of bonding against the infrastructure of this town. We did not pay for what we need to have done for the last 10 or 15 years. The bill has come due. We need to bring it up to date. We have to pay for it. So basically, we need to retire a $300 million debt that we built up. This is one way that we could do it, the way the BET is structured, a way that could regularize this with the least amount of pain to the taxpayer. It's neither right or wrong the way we're going to do it. It's your choice of policy. I salute Mr. Huffman. His concern is genuine and deep, and I also caution you about the same concerns. What we're asking to be done tonight is a policy change in the town. We're breaking from our past traditions. It's not that we don't borrow. We have borrowed before. We borrow from ourselves. We borrow from this fund or that fund where we have capital sitting or cash sitting, and we use it, we pay it back. But we only have to deal with ourselves if something has a hiccup or whatever. We're very generous to ourselves. This case, we're being asked to let the borrowing go to a third party, an outside institutional lender, who has no real interest in the town. They have interest in their business, nor should they. It's a contract. We borrow money. They expect us to pay it back as and when we say. So we are now, in a bit, leaving ourselves open to the outside control. Now, let's be serious. $2.5 million isn't even going to be a seismic jiggle on our tax rates in itself. We're starting a process which the BET has told us is going to be 14 or 15 million as we go down the line, but it will regularize.
One minute, please.
It's reasonable. It's well thought out, but we are changing the way that we do it. The key to this is not what we're doing and what we authorize the BET to do. The key to this is being very, very cautious because we're skating closer to the edge than we've had before. Now, hopefully, we have good professional skaters here who are going to be responsible. And I have that faith in our present leadership in the BET, both the Budget Committee and the chairmanship of the BET. But what we're doing is we're creating a politician's dream of being able to finance future promises. If you remember, the CIP has been expanding. Think about it. Our job now is to be very careful and go back to that resolution we talked about in April about the CIP project. It's our responsibility to look as firmly and hard at what we're spending. Just because somebody else has made it easier for us doesn't relieve us of the responsibility. But remember, when you vote tonight and you vote for this, you are changing the town policy of over 60 years.
Further discussion on the motion to delete the bonding authorization? Christine Edwards, District 8.
Thank you. I don't mind bonding, and I've enjoyed the fact that we've had such very low taxes in Greenwich as we unfortunately have not kept our infrastructure in order and in care and well maintained, and therefore we have to look at replacing buildings, replacing schools, replacing a lot of things. I don't mind bonding when we have the opportunity to bond and get property like open space in Pomerantz. It's a unique opportunity. I come before you to say, however, that to bond for $2.5 million seems like taking your latte and putting it on your credit card. I can see if we're going to bond for $30 million, $100 million. Maybe I'd even buy some of the bonds if they'd offered municipal whatever. Somebody can talk to me. I'm not sophisticated in that. But I do know that I don't buy a latte on a credit card, and I think $2.5 million is too small a number to be considered on a bonding point. When we're looking at borrowing, it's a very, very serious opportunity for putting our tax dollars at work, and from my perspective, it's not that we shouldn't bond, but for this particular issue at $2.5 million, I'll write my check today for an extra $200 in taxes, because I don't think that we're having to spread that out too far. So that's my concern for everyone. It's not against bonding, but not for $2.5 million. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to delete. Mr. Lash, First Selectman.
Let me just be clear about what we're doing here. Far be it from me from time to time to agree with Mr. Von Keyserling, but I will this time. We're paying to repair infrastructure that we already own. We're creating almost nothing new in this 10-year plan. The exceptions are really the Safe Routes to Schools programs and some sidewalks, and essentially nothing else. We're replacing 40-year-old boilers in schools. We're repairing roofs in the high school which are leaking now, and we know from the Hamilton Avenue experience what happens to the whole school if we don't replace the roof when it's leaking. We're replacing a police headquarters building which has an asbestos problem and which has, I'm told, I wasn't here to know, the police department was told when they moved into it that it was temporary, and that was 40 or 50 years ago. We're not doing new things here. We're replacing things that we already have, and we're not making them bigger except to the extent that our departments are bigger than they were when they moved into these facilities 30 or 40 years ago. So that's the first thing. We're not spending money on new things. We're spending money on things to which we're already committed. Second, we're going to raise this $2.5 million and not the $10 million that we forecast a year ago, because through good management, in the way that Mr. Simon described, we've been able to save money in other places in the operating budget and take that extra money and contribute it to the capital reserve account. And so we're not asking for $10 million here. We're asking for $2.5. Now, somebody might say, well, 2.5 is so close to zero, we ought to be able to figure out how to get through. But the point is, we don't want that reserve account to come down to a very small balance. So we're going to sell these bonds to pay for part of the construction of the new public safety facility. They'll be sold promptly, and they'll sell quickly and at a very low rate of interest. And hopefully the rest of the projections will turn out to be accurate, and we will end up with a little bigger balance in the capital reserve account at year end. That's the plan. But to allow ourselves to hope that things work out and have nothing left in the capital reserve account is not wise. The point about bonding for short-term purposes is this. If you're not in favor of this bonding, then in other words, if you're against this, then you have to be for something else, and there are only a handful of possibilities. You can be for further delay on many of these critical infrastructure projects. I don't think many of us are for continued delay. We've seen how that works out. It costs us much more in the end. Plus, we have the cost of inflation. The second thing you can be for is not appropriating the money for the projects, but going ahead and taxing for it and building up a $30 or $40 or $50 million capital reserve account. Nobody that I've talked to in the run-up to tonight has thought that that was a good idea, because nobody likes to be taxed without knowing what we're going to do with the money later. Maybe I won't be here. Maybe Mr. Tessie and the BET won't be here. Maybe you won't be here. But somebody will come in with that $40 or $50 million savings account, and then they'll decide what they want to do. So taxing people now and not starting the projects, not a very popular idea. And the third possibility, of course, is the one that many communities use, and that is to have very spiky, unpredictable changes in the mill rate. So we need an extra 12, 13, 14 million next year. Instead of raising taxes 3.5%, we would raise taxes 11 or 12%. The year after that, we might only raise taxes 3.5% again. But if you live on a fixed income, or if you're a young family stretching to buy your first house in Greenwich, spiky, unpredictable tax rate changes are not a good thing. And so the BET has developed this plan, and we've been operating under this plan for the last 4 or 5 years. Tonight just happens to be the night when the plan brings us to the point where we need to borrow some money for 4 or 5 years. That's the only thing that's different. This is the same plan we've been working under for this whole time period. So I urge you to leave the bonding resolution in this evening, and then, of course, to vote for the entire budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to delete? Yes, sir. District 8.
Jeb Beckwith, District 8. I'm on the Finance Committee, and I've been a banker for about 20 years. I guess there's a couple things. The first thing is, for those people that think we're setting a precedent here, I suggest you go back and look at the town of Greenwich CAF. We've had $47 million of bonds which have the town of Greenwich behind them, general obligation bonds. There's a Moody's report out there that talks about our fund balance. If you're concerned about the levels of debt in this town, don't address the bond issue. Look at the spending issues. I've looked at the spending pretty carefully, and I'm not smart enough to find any savings here. But going out and issuing AAA bonds to raise our fund balances to cover the liabilities that we already have seems to me a very prudent thing to do. When you look at the Moody's report and look at what the creditors are already saying about the town of Greenwich, the creditors are looking at the one weak link in our credit ratings, right? Potential weak link in our credit ratings right now is our fund balances are underfunded versus where our actual liabilities are. So again, I would urge you to, if you're concerned about taxes going up over time, then focus on the spending. But for anybody out there that can go out and issue a AAA bond on a tax-exempt basis on their own personal account, I think, more power to you. But for most of us, we're not able to do that except through the town. The $2.5 million seems to me that we're not borrowing enough, to be honest. It seems to me that that if anything, we should be borrowing more, funding our insurance and our capital reserve funds to the appropriate level. And And again, it's the bonding is a reflection of the spending that you may or may not agree with, but focus on the spending, don't focus on the bonding.
Further discussion on the Huffman motion to delete the bonding authorization? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Huffman motion to delete bonding authorization, and proceed to poll your delegation. We will we will continue if there are other motions directed to the budget resolutions. Are there any further motions addressed to the budget resolutions? All right, I don't see any, so we will need to await the results of the vote on this before voting on the budget as finally amended tonight. Now, keep in mind, I did say that if there was any need to revisit our appropriations as a result of a vote that we took, and this, we'll see what happens with this vote, but if someone wanted to go back and revisit an appropriation, I think this would be a circumstance where that might be warranted based on the results of the vote we are taking now. Let me say this about the budget, the final vote that we will take tonight on the budget as amended. When we have finished going through both the appropriations and the budget resolutions, there are some who might think that they want to register a protest and vote against the budget. I just want everyone to be aware of the effect of a no vote on the budget tonight. The charter requires the RTM to adopt a budget by the middle of May. We would not be meeting prior to that deadline. So if we do not adopt, if we were to vote the budget down tonight, the effect pursuant to the charter would be that we have not adopted a budget for the coming fiscal year, and as a result, the budget as recommended by the BET would take effect. So I just want everyone to be aware how that works. Okay. Mr. Boutel? All right, Mr. Boutel, please come forward to the microphone.
Mr. Moderator, my question through you to the appropriate town official is, as you have stated correctly, we cannot increase the size of an appropriation, but given what a number of people have said about thinking that the current year's bonding number is low, given that increasing it to $10 million as a new amendment, would we, under the charter and law, be permitted to increase the authorization that we are granting the First Selectman and the BET to bond? In other words, do we have the authority to amend it and increase the number to $10 million?
We do not, according to Mr. Fox. Are there any further motions addressed to our budget? All right, we will await the results of the pending vote. We are waiting on Districts 6 and 7. We have the results of the vote on the Huffman motion to delete the bonding authorization. Those in favor, 48, opposed, 123, abstaining 2. That motion has failed. There being no further business regarding amending our budget resolution, that now brings us to our final vote on the budget as amended. We have deleted $50,000 from the from the fire code, and we have made some other changes to the budget language. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards? Item number 3, 2006-2007 budget as amended, and proceed to poll your delegation. That being the final business to come before us tonight, we will await the results of that vote before adjourning. I have the results of the vote on our budget as amended, item 3 on our call. Those in favor, 163, opposed 14, abstaining 0. The budget has been adopted. There being no further business to come before the meeting, and absent objection, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Mr. Huffman, thank you for the grist for discussion.